It all begins in the mansion of the Welton family, in the kingdom of Seldom. After a long night of sleep, the protagonist wakes up with the light of day. He takes a deep breath and gets up to start his day. His name is Jamie, and sitting on the bed, he wonders if he had a strange dream again. He was the eldest son of the Count's family in the kingdom of Seldom, the official heir. Also, before this life, he had been an extremely powerful person and ended up being sealed in a magical circle. But before being sealed, he had left a message, because even the 12 celestial gods couldn't defeat him, only seal him. It wouldn't be enough. He begins to laugh a lot and says how he couldn't find it funny, and that they could continue with the sealing. However, when he awakens, the radiant lights will die in darkness, and they will always be in agony and beg to be defeated. In his life, the protagonist was Diablo Volpir, and the deities say they will wait for this moment. However, he would be trapped in eternal suffering. Thus, the protagonist was sealed by the 12 gods, and after passing through the crack that opened in the barrier, after an eternity, he was reborn as the son of the Welton family. When he was born, his parents were enchanted to see him, and both thought he resembled both of them. Jamie, even as a baby, tried to speak, but he couldn't say a word. Even as a newborn, he understood all the words, but he didn't understand why he couldn't say anything. As a noble, he received much love from his parents, and 9 years have passed since then. Still in the morning, the family maid was going to the protagonist's room to call him. Jamie was looking out the window, reflecting on everything that was happening. He sighs deeply and says that this would be another tiring day. Emmy approaches and calls the young master, who, upon seeing her, wishes her a good day. She asks why he was awake so early. Jamie says he was watching the sunrise because the sky was really beautiful. Emmy is enchanted and says that the young man was very affectionate. Hearing this, the protagonist wasn't sure if he was really like that. While the nanny helped her master dress, she said that observing the sky was great, but his parents were already waiting, so they had to hurry. After Jamie was ready, they go straight to the dining room. Upon arriving, Emmy tells the protagonist's parents that he was already there. Jamie takes a deep breath and thinks that it will always be like the other times. When he enters, his mother wishes him a good day, while his sister screams with happiness upon seeing her brother. The protagonist seems pleased to see his mother. He then approaches his sister and sits next to the little one. His mother says that their children were beautiful when they were close, and says she imagined they were beautiful because they took after their father. The woman was the only daughter of the great Bell family, and was named Sears. Her father was the head of the Welton family, one of the only 5 swordmasters in the kingdom. Count Argento tells his wife that it was the opposite, and that the children took after the mother. For Jamie, even though his father had a rather impressive title, he was just a fool for his wife and children. His sister was the second daughter of the Welton family, and was named Sarah. She loved the protagonist a lot, and even fed him to get compliments from him. Jamie did the same with his sister, and his parents were proud to see that. Even though the protagonist did all of this, he found it all very tiring because he just wanted to be alone. After eating, he goes straight to his room and, bored, lies down, saying that he would never get used to how affectionate they could be. He feels better for being older because before he wanted to die, because he had to speak beautifully, as if he had a tongue tie, but there were still many things he could do, like the private library, which was really cool. However, he considered himself terribly weak, and while lying down, a creature that was a pet approached to play with its master. But Jamie said it was fine, as being reborn had given him a completely new opportunity, and crushing the creature with his hands. He said that those 12 stupid gods still existed, and were still draining their faithful, as if they were parasites, although that was the full extent of their powers, since black magic did not exist in the era he now lived in. But now time was finally on his side. This made Jamie furious, and he thought there were still 12 gods who just kept being as arrogant as they always had been, so he had to become stronger and defeat them. Suddenly, Emmy opened the door and told the young master it was time for him to read children's books with the madame. The protagonist paused for a moment without responding, but soon turned around, and with a completely different attitude, he told the nanny he would go. But Jamie didn't like doing that at all, because every time he had to act cute, he felt like being sealed again. Even so, he went to where his mother and sister were waiting. The protagonist, although he didn't like it, approached, knelt down, and asked his mother what book she would read to them. Sears and Sarah were surprised to see this reaction, and started hugging him, saying that he was adorable. After that, the woman said the book she would read was called The Great Magician Heinz, and began reading the story. After she finished reading the book, she asked if it had been fun. Jamie said yes, and that he wanted to become a great magician like Heinz. His mother said that since he was so smart, she was sure he could become a great magician. Moreover, he had already defeated 3 of the magic professors, but the protagonist, hearing that, thought it was almost a joke, since his mother had brought the professors in, and they weren't the best. Sears told Jamie that his father would bring the best magician to teach him, and seeing how much his mother wanted him to have the best, he thought this wasn't a joke, and added that his father was amazing. After they finished talking, the protagonist got up to go to the library. His mother, smiling, told him not to read too much, and that he should also go outside to play a little, but first, he should give her a hug. Jamie just wanted to leave and didn't want to do that. Nevertheless, he went to his mother and gave her a hug, impressing her, and she started saying that he was amazing and should play more with her instead of going to the library. But the protagonist let out a loud shout, telling his mother to stop. Now, he could go to the library and be alone. After reading the book, he said he had only read it because it was the last book on mana breathing, but it hadn't been useful at all. He even wanted to read a few more books, but it was already time for the meal, and Jamie admitted that he was tired of eating with his family 3 times a day, but it was better he go. As he descended to the hall, he encountered an elderly man in the corridor, who was observing one of the artifacts and said it was as expected from Count Welton, as he had used such an artifact in front of the entrance of the dining hall as decoration. The protagonist, seeing the man, wondered who he could be, but it didn't take long for the man to greet him. Jamie realized that this person had an immense amount of mana, overflowing from his body, almost like a violent storm. The protagonist deduced that he could be at least a 7th-class magician, but he was also uncertain about how he had gotten there without a guide, or maybe he was an intruder, though he seemed too relaxed to be an intruder in the mansion of the swordmaster. The color of the magician's eyes began to change, and the protagonist asked who he was and how he had entered, as this place wasn't for just anyone to enter. When the magician's eyes changed, he saw that the boy had a lot of talent and was above average. Jamie was waiting for an answer and thought that, if it had been him from before, at that moment, he would have made that man kneel. But now he found that attitude irritating and the fact that he was measuring his potential. Then he starts using his abilities, since he didn't like this situation, thinking that now he would show how painful it could be. The magician, seeing this, admits that the boy was much better than they had said, because he had a large amount of mana, even though he was only 9 years old, and even more so acting this way. So, the magician also starts using his abilities to gauge how strong Jamie was. The protagonist was furious, and thought about how that man dared to test him. He then remembers his past, when he was Diablo Volfir, about to defeat even the gods. He prepares to attack. Jamie begins to launch his magic at the man who stands still, waiting for the right moment to defend himself. The protagonist, seeing what had happened, admits that it didn't work as he expected, as he didn't imagine it wouldn't cause any damage. The magician, on the other hand, was excited because he hadn't expected such magic from a 9-year-old boy. So now, he starts to attack, saying it had been a good attempt, but now, it was his turn. Jamie was surprised by how the magician was, as he had completely changed his mood, but soon he realizes that the magic wasn't aimed at him, so, he recognizes that there was no reason to react. The man was surprised, as he hadn't expected this reaction from the boy. Suddenly, Count Argento intervenes in the duel and tells the magician that he was going too far, asking his son if he was all right. Jamie pretends to be crying, and his father says that his baby was in shock, which made the protagonist feel awkward. Argento tells Marquis Unmel that they needed to have a conversation. The magician realizes that the boy changed his mood in front of his father, so he starts laughing, saying it was fun and that he was very jealous of the Count. Argento was confused because he had attacked someone's son out of the blue and was saying that. After that, they went to talk, and while having tea, the Count tells the old man that the boy was his son, and the heir of the Welton family. Unmel says he knew that. This infuriates the swordmaster, and he asks why he knew that and still attacked. The magician tells him to calm down because his aura was starting to hurt. He then asks how much he knew about his son. Argento asks in what sense. The magician wants to know about the boy's brilliance. The Count says he knew the boy was brilliant, which is why he had entrusted him, but now that he attacked out of nowhere, he could be holding some kind of grudge. Unmel tells Argento that he really didn't know much about the boy, so he would act as if he hadn't heard his request. The Count asks what that meant. Marquis Unmel, among the living magicians, was known as the strongest 8th-class magician. The Count wonders how someone like the Marquis hadn't accepted his son, as he could imagine that Jamie wasn't as talented as he appeared. The magician tells Argento that he didn't know what he was thinking, but he was wrong. The swordsman asks the Marquis to be more specific. The old man says that he couldn't accept the boy as a student because he wouldn't be able to handle him, which leaves the Count surprised, as he hadn't expected such an answer from an 8th-class magician. Unmel says that Jamie was able to read all of his magic. Argento asks how, as that was impossible, even if he was brilliant. The old man says that the little brat was sure his magic wouldn't be able to touch him, leaving him surprised because the boy didn't even hesitate with his magic. Unmel says that it wasn't just that, and that the boy was already at a third-class level with his own learning. But if excluding the limits of his body, he was above the fourth class, and that's why it was clear that a genius, a monster, was born. So that child didn't need a teacher. He just needed support until he perfected himself and maybe become the legendary ninth-class magician. The Count was stunned after hearing that, as he hadn't expected his son to become the legendary ninth-class magician. The magician stands up and apologizes for attacking the boy, saying that a great storm was approaching, so he had to accept magic, not the entire world, and that things were about to get fun. Argento couldn't respond, as he hadn't expected to hear all of that, and when the magician left, he remained seated, thinking about what he was going to do. Meanwhile, in another part of the mansion, the protagonist screamed, unable to take it anymore. Arriving in his room, he said that it had really been tiring, because after his mother heard what the old man had done, she started hugging him, wanting to know if he was okay, and saying that he must have been scared, not letting her leave. The protagonist didn't know how many hours he had been stuck there, but while taking off his accessories, he said that at least he had seen real magic, and that it wouldn't have been bad even in the mythical dynasty. But what was bothering him was what Marquis Unmel and his father, Count Argento, had been talking about. Jamie said that he knew his father was strong, but not that strong, and now he knew that his father was worthy of being his father. Unmel, sitting on the bed, asked the boy what was so funny, startling Jamie, as he thought he was alone. The protagonist was shocked to see the old man in his room. The magician asked what he was thinking, as he hadn't even realized someone was there. Jamie let out a loud scream that could be heard from afar, and, falling to the floor, asked Unmel what he was doing there. The old man started laughing and said that he was really a child for being surprised like that. The protagonist asked how he had managed to enter the room. The magician said he had teleported. Jamie, still scared, said it seemed like his father hadn't taken his life and admitted that the old man wasn't just anyone. Unmel told the protagonist that he was a real child, both in front of his father, and how he had reacted to him now. The protagonist began to stand up and said that family was strange. The magician let out a hearty laugh and said that he was funny, adding that it was a shame because if his abilities were a little stronger, he could have been his teacher. Jamie thought the old man was strange, and began to wonder why he was looking at him like that since they had just met. Unmel gave the protagonist a book as a gift, which Jamie deduced was a magical tome, and asked why he was receiving it. The old man said that the magic he had been using was very ancient, and that's why he was giving the book. But hearing that, the protagonist didn't like the idea of his magic being ancient, and even found it humiliating. The magician, seeing that reaction, wondered if the boy was touched by his gift, and began to say that the book was filled with magic he had created himself, and he would be the first to see it. Jamie was surprised, as he hadn't imagined that the book contained magic created by a magician of that level. Unmel told the protagonist that he had high hopes for him, and before leaving, said that he was already wondering how he would be the next time they met. The protagonist said that it would probably be more than he could imagine, and began reading the book, which talked about mana breathing through the mouth and absorbing mana into the heart. It was known to be the most efficient way, but the fact that there was a limit to it was a great trap. Jamie continued wondering why Unmel had said his technique was so ancient, and made him question how incredible it was. But, seeing what was written there, he found it very interesting, and admitted that it was very difficult to approach, and that he had to feel every particle of mana. So he lay down to try to do what was written there, thinking he had to do his best to absorb it through his skin, so he had to be very precise. The protagonist began wondering how many people could do that, and thought it was impossible to replace the ancient technique. But since he was Diablo Volfir, it was not impossible. So he sat up, grabbed the book again, and continued reading, saying that Unmel had taught him something good, as he was now sure he would devour every piece of it. He then summoned his pet creature, and said he would need its help first. The monster, after being summoned, went straight to the protagonist's shoulder. He asked the creature to break off some mana. The creature starts flying, then blinks, breaking the mana for its master. Jamie knows that the first setback of Unmel's technique was breaking the mana into a size that could be absorbed by the skin. There is a limit, where you need a fixed location and size, but since the protagonist had Black, it wasn't a problem. Jamie tells the creature that now they would begin. Black had made a soul contract with the protagonist, and since he was going to break the mana, that part was resolved. With the first problem resolved, the second setback wasn't an issue. The protagonist knows that his body, in other words, if there is a limit, it is the amount of mana his heart can absorb. so he just had to store the mana in multiple places, and that's why he had no limits. Time passed, and Jamie no longer left his room, as he wanted to study as much as possible. His father and Emmy were at the door, watching what the boy was doing. The nanny was shocked to see the protagonist like this. Argeneo was astonished to witness it. Mana was swirling around Jamie's body, and even though the Count knew that the Marquis had given something to his son, he couldn't understand how he could already do this with the mana in just one night. He hadn't imagined his son had such hidden talent. Argeneo tells the nanny to leave Jamie like that, but since they didn't know when this would end, they should keep someone watching him. Emmy says she will stay there and keep an eye on him. The woman was worried and says she hoped the boy was okay. The Count, on the other hand, wondered if his son had inherited something from his wife's family, since he was a magician and not a swordsman. But even so, this was beyond what he expected, as a 9th-class magician was not just anyone. The next day, after a long training session, Jamie wakes up and starts celebrating, saying that he had succeeded. The act of moving and breaking the mana was difficult at first, as it was unpredictable, but it wasn't so bad after a few tries. However, the protagonist deduces that 4th-class mana was his limit for now, but admits he was close to reaching 5th class. Black lands on his master's head, and Jamie, reflecting, says that he had no intention of modifying his body, as he knew that body was young and weak. The creature was communicating with its master, who says that he understood and would try not to be impatient, as he had already gone through this path a second time, and it shouldn't be too difficult. The protagonist uses a spell to make the creature invisible and says he was planning to meet his father, so he asked Black to hide his mana, as it wouldn't do him any good for his father to know about the monster. After they perform a test, the protagonist says that he could barely feel where the creature was, and, as expected of his familiar spirit, he doesn't think his father will be able to notice. He then prepares himself and says it was time to meet his father and starts walking to find him, releasing his mana. Meanwhile, the Count was talking to Takumi and asks what brought him there. The priest says he just wanted to stop by to greet him, as he knew there had been no issues with the religion in the Heist territory, so he would like to thank him for allowing the Janus religion. Argeneo says he thought it would be of great help to the locals, so he decided to allow it. Takumi asks what that meant. The Count says that, since he always sought only the best, he would make Janus the greatest religion now that it had set foot in his territory. The priest, hearing this, deduces that Argeneo was warning him not to treat his people as citizens of God, even though he had heard rumors about him, so he thinks he shouldn't take him lightly. The Count says their conversation is finished for the day, as he must be very busy. Takumi thanks the swordsman's kindness and wishes him safety on his way back. The priest says that the blessing of Janus be with him. Then, he departs on his journey, leaving the Count reflecting on their conversation. The protagonist was hidden, listening to everything. After Takumi left, he said he knew, and that the symbol of a crescent moon holding a yellow sphere and the impure divine power the old man was emitting made Jamie wonder why they were in the territory where he lived. The protagonist began to wonder why his father had suddenly decided to allow the religion in his territory and why it had to be Janus. He couldn't admit that he couldn't let this happen and that he wouldn't allow this religion to establish itself in his territory. But since there were so many restrictions holding him back, there was only one choice left. Since it was a religion that entered with the Count's permission, the only way the protagonist could get rid of it was to make the Count expel them. So, he decided that first, he would need to find his father and begin investigating at night. He enters the Welton family's living room, and his father asks him if he had finished all his training. Jamie says yes. The Count, who seemed to think his son was enjoying magic, replies that yes, he liked it a lot. But Argeneo was speechless. The protagonist asks what the problem is. The swordsman says he had hoped that his son would grow up as a normal boy, which left Jamie confused. But he had so much talent that it was difficult for that to happen. And the protagonist also knew that living life as a genius wasn't the best thing. When a child shows talent as they grow, everyone applauds them for it. However, the moment their growth is stunted, the same people who praise them would turn on them fiercely. And Argeneo wondered if this was really good for Jamie. The Count stands up and tells his son that if he wanted to give up magic, he was free to do so whenever he wanted. But if he was willing to continue, he would support him. The protagonist laughs and tells his father not to worry, as he wouldn't give up on magic. Argeneo, still pleased to hear this, says that this was his son, but wonders if that was really the mana of a 9-year-old boy, as he could already feel the energy throughout his body, yet the mana was being absorbed. But soon the Count became terrified, as mana was not something that could be stored in places other than the heart. He then asks his son about the magical tome the Marquis had given him, whether he had mastered it. Jamie says yes, and thinks it wasn't just that. He had also improved something. Argeneo was astonished, as he didn't know what the Marquis had created. It was incredibly impressive how that child had improved in a single day, and seeing this, one could now imagine that he was someone with the potential to become a legendary 9th-class magician. The Count begins to laugh and thinks that, compared to his son, his own talent was nothing. Jamie asks his father what was going wrong. Argeneo says he was proud, which is why he was laughing. The protagonist begins to laugh, and his father stands up and ruffles his hair, making him nervous about what was happening. But soon the Count asks his son if that bat was his summoning. Confused, Jamie asks if he could see it, as he thought it was impossible, since he was sure he had applied the invisibility correctly on it, and if his father was able to feel it, it was truly amazing. Argeneo says he wasn't sure it was a bat, as it seemed a bit round for one. Jamie says it was a bat, and that he had been hiding it because he thought no one would like it, but at the same time, he was worried that his father would find out he had used black magic. The Count hugs his son and congratulates him for succeeding, and it was clear that he was more surprised by his talent. Argeneo continues praising the protagonist for a while, until eventually, he is able to leave the room and admits that he was tired, as he couldn't understand how the house was filled with so much love and affection. As night fell, the protagonist was preparing to leave and summoned Black again. Now, after being prepared along with his summon, the protagonist says that he will now make sure to find out why they decided to enter this territory. The creature grew larger wings and began carrying its master to the city. Jance was talking to his partner and asked what the boss had said. Philip replied that he had told them to proceed with the plan if they wanted to stay alive. The mid-ranking officer of the criminal organization, Laval, says that he doesn't understand what they're getting involved in. The big guy asks if he doesn't see that the boss is sacrificing half the organization for his own gain, and that Heiss is a place where even the Count would let their organization prosper, as long as they didn't cross his path. But human trafficking was crossing it, so they had to destroy that line. Philip says that if they're lucky, they might get away without being caught. Jance says that's what he thinks, but they would eventually be caught. Then he asks his partner if he knew that the Count loves his children, and if he finds out that the organization is using children for human trafficking in his territory, that will be the day the entire underworld of the city is swept away. Philip says the boss must trust that they won't get caught. The big guy says that doesn't make sense. The officer says that Han's men said they were going to do this. Jance wonders if Han would do anything to get involved. Philip then asks if he now wants to denounce them or run away. The big guy says he'd rather run than denounce them. His partner agrees with him. The underworld rule, although the responsibility for the crime lies with those involved, is to not report what they're planning. Jance asks if he had a plan, as the organization will look for them everywhere. Philip replies that they should do the best they can, since they had to try any way they could, with whatever they had. After that, they began wondering whose idea it was to start the human trafficking in this territory. Meanwhile, Jamie was hidden, listening to the conversation. The officer says that someone must have made an offer to the boss, and that he was easily influenced anyway. Suddenly, the criminals were startled when they saw there was another person there, so they quickly asked who he was. Jamie replies that it was interesting they were asking who he was. Jance prepares to attack, and says that since he didn't want to speak, he would lose his life. Philip also goes on the attack with his partner, but when they get closer they find nothing and start wondering where that person had gone. But suddenly, Jamie says they were rookies, scaring them. He also says that they were talking about something very interesting, then starts descending with Black. The protagonist says that he would like to hear the details, then uses a spell to make the men tell everything they knew. After a while, on their knees, the criminals revealed everything that had happened and were still under hypnosis. Now knowing everything about the human trafficking of children, Jamie says that this was the crime his parents despised the most, and wonders what those idiots were thinking doing this. The protagonist found it infuriating and said that he was already pissed enough with the gods messing with humans, and now he had these criminals playing with the lives of others. The protagonist wondered what the boss of these men was thinking to accept this, because he was sure they knew his father. Jamie had a bad feeling about this, so he stands up and uses more magic on the criminals. The protagonist tells them to run to the Count's residence and inform him about everything they were planning to do. Philip and Jance get up and start walking, ready to tell the Count everything. Now, Jamie tells Black that they could return, so the creature grew larger wings to take them back. But unexpectedly, the criminals were attacked, and Philip was even thrown back. Jamie, seeing this, was startled, but could only watch as the injured criminal was thrown against the wall. After seeing that both were lifeless, unsure of what it could be, Jamie began to fly, and from above, observed who had done this. A group that had just arrived was the one who attacked the criminals, and now they were trying to flee due to the noise they had caused. The protagonist began to wonder where these lunatics had come from. Using more of his magic, He spoke about how they dared to do this to the people he commanded. Then, using a magic circle, he told the criminals, who were already lifeless, that he would delay their death and that they should at least fulfill the task he had given them. As Jamie finished his magic, Han, the mid-ranking officer of the rival criminal organization, observed everything and told his subordinates to drag those men along with the person in the dark cloak. One of the criminals asked the protagonist, who had his back turned, if he was looking for death. Jamie stayed alert to see what the man would do next. The henchmen began to drag Jance and Philip, and they begged for someone to save them. Seeing this, the protagonist's mood shifted, and he began speaking to Han, but before he could finish, he was attacked by a shot to the head. The criminal fired several more shots and began laughing, saying he loved this, also using magic, stating that he wanted to hear more of Jamie's screams while burning his body. His subordinates were stunned watching this. Han said he had done this to make sure he finished off the man, but suddenly, the protagonist appeared next to the criminal and asked if that was all he had. This left the man startled, and Jamie asked if it had been fun defeating one of his own subordinates. Han, terrified, began to wonder who this person was, why he hadn't been defeated, and what that sinister aura was covering his body. The protagonist moved closer and asked the criminal why he was acting like a madman when he only had third-class mana. Even though he was terrified, Han became angry and, using a third-class explosion magic, created a large flame, saying he would defeat Jamie. But he admitted that, although it wasn't comparable to fifth-class explosion magic, this would be enough to burn the small one. He began to attack the protagonist, but before he could finish the attack, Jamie, freezing him in place, said that he would tell him something about how the human mind worked. He continued, saying that they felt extremely weak when facing those stronger than them, and that was why he enjoyed manipulating the minds of those weaker than him. Han collapsed to his knees, paralyzed. His subordinates, terrified, wondered how their master had been so easily defeated. They began to think that the protagonist was a monster and that they should run. Jamie told them to consider themselves unlucky and started using more magic on Han, making him lose consciousness completely. Now, with the criminal unable to do anything, the protagonist said everything was fine. He approached, placing his hand on his head, calling him a slave, and told him to answer his questions. Defeated, Han began to refer to the protagonist as his master. The criminal began telling everything he knew about the human trafficking operation. After hearing all of this, the protagonist admitted that it wasn't much different from what he had heard before and thought he had just wasted his time, but he could inform his father through the other two. Now, after interrogating Han, he wondered what he should do with him, as, although he had held back, the man's soul was already ruined. Jamie thought that since this man was a third-class magician, he would normally turn him into a zombie, but if he did that, he would soon burn out, and perhaps, if it were on a battlefield, the zombie's physical appearance wouldn't be a problem, but in this place, it would be poison. So, he admitted that he had no other choice and would have to use another option. Since Han was a third-class magician, he must have been filled with mana. The protagonist then begins to drain all of Han's vital energy, along with his mana. After finishing, he finds it not bad, although there are impurities mixed with the mana due to human physical limitations. Now, Jamie was worried about what to do with Jance and Philip as, despite having forcibly filled them with mana and brought them back to life, they wouldn't remain like that for long. The protagonist summons Black again, and after the creature returns, he says that those men had things to do and couldn't simply be left lifeless. Jamie admits it has been a while since he last used necromancy, which is the ability to resurrect the dead and use their bodies. Although similar to bringing them back to life, it's not exactly the same thing. This is because the resurrected bodies of the dead using necromancy are no longer living beings. It's literally raising the dead, a being that is no longer alive, which goes against the natural course. The protagonist begins speaking, saying that the undead, beings that were dead but not entirely, from that moment on, would be his loyal slaves. Now, they must live a life beyond death. Jamie asks Black for help. The creature begins sending mana to its master, who says that they could now begin, and tells his servants to abandon their lives and rise. Philip, even after all this, was still reacting. The protagonist didn't understand how this was happening, but continued with his work and said that an immortal body awaited them, and they must pass beyond death, ending by telling the sinners to come to him. The magic was being cast, and Philip began screaming crazily, unlike Jance. Black, from above, continued sending mana. The protagonist started looking at his servants, who said they were now waiting for his orders. But seeing that aura, Jamie said something was wrong, as there was still black smoke. He then admitted he might have forgotten something. Black began to communicate with its master, who, frustrated, asked the creature what was wrong and what it was questioning. The eye didn't like seeing the protagonist like that. Pulling the creature, Jamie said it must have been something he missed, although he had the possibility of failure in mind, and it was hard to get through that. Despite usually not considering his past achievements, it was a bit frustrating knowing they were all gone. But in any case, he couldn't use those humans in this way, so he thought about simply getting rid of them. If they continued emitting that black smoke, they wouldn't be able to do anything about Genesis' orders, much less go to public places. Black started thinking about something and approached its master, biting his face. Jamie became furious and asked how it dared bite his cheek, throwing the creature away. The creature landed on Jance's head and began sucking up all the black smoke. The protagonist was impressed, as he didn't know Black could do such things. It consumed all the smoke, and its body began to expand. After everything was done, Jamie said that now he could use his servants, but noticed that Black had grown immense. He then approached it and said it had done a good job, telling his servants they should now give him their names and consciousness, and ordered them to awaken. The one who used to be Jance was now Azard, and the one who used to be Philip was now Raiza. The protagonist continued telling them to awaken, making them regain consciousness. Jamie extended his hand for his servants to rise, but noticed they were confused. He thought that they were probably feeling confused and overwhelmed, so he decided to give them some time to understand things and stood still in front of them. Azard asked the protagonist if it had been him who had turned him into this state. Jamie answered that it had indeed been him. The large man began to speak, asking who this person was, who seemed to be only about 9 or 10 years old, yet he could feel his enormous and terrifying aura. He was exactly like the beings Jamie had only read about in books when he was younger, an evil that shouldn't exist, a being whose existence defies the logic of the world. The protagonist asks what was wrong, and if he looked like a demon lord to them. Raiza clenches his fist and says that he didn't know if he was a demon lord or not, but he simply couldn't see him as a human. Jamie finds it interesting, stopping to think that way, even though the man acted so aggressively. He also realizes that those weren't the eyes of a subordinate looking at their master, and that this was also partly due to their deficiencies. The protagonist raises his finger and says that this wouldn't be the end of it, and when he lowers his finger, Raiza's head was thrown to the ground. The servant began groaning on the floor. Jamie says that he will forgive him just this once, but the next time he makes that kind of expression, he can't guarantee that he'll spare his life. The servant on the ground says he understands. The protagonist tells Azard to keep this in mind as well. This is what it means to be a soul servant. Whether they want it or not, as long as they are bound by a contract, their lives belong to Jamie. That's what black magic is. The protagonist says that, in any case, he wasn't a demon lord. Azard asks what he was then. Jamie says he is a dark mage who once tried to defeat the gods, and that even now, that is the only purpose of his existence. The protagonist tells his servants that now they only had one task, to investigate Genis and gather information about them. Now, both listen to their master without hesitation. Jamie says there's one more thing. They must bring him someone who knows something about human trafficking, because he needed that person to report the situation in their place. After that, the protagonist leaves, leaving them behind. Raiza lifts his head and realizes that his master was no longer there. They breathe a sigh of relief that Jamie had left. The servants began to look at each other, and Azard asks his partner if they should go. Raiza replies yes, as their master's orders were absolute, and they must be followed. Meanwhile, Black continued talking to the protagonist, who says that the servants would be fine because he had tied the subordination knot tightly around them, so they wouldn't be able to disobey his commands. And after that, his father would handle the human trafficking incident himself. Black questions his master, who gets irritated because he couldn't just let this happen, as that territory would be his future. A person was approaching while the protagonist was walking, and he said they were about to return. A boy bumped into Jamie, and he was startled by something hitting him. He turned around and furious asked if the boy was blind, only to realize it was a child. June says to the protagonist that he was also a child, awkwardly replying that he was also 9 years old, but he would let him go this time, though he should be more careful. The boy, not understanding anything, begins to ask why the protagonist was speaking like that, as if he were an adult, when he didn't even have a single white hair. Black began to bite his master's head, causing him to stop walking immediately and try to understand what the creature wanted. Then he turns to June and sees how he is, and continues asking the eye what had happened. The protagonist asks Black if he had bitten his head because the boy had mocked the color of his hair, because if that was the reason, he shouldn't stop his master by biting his head. Then, in a dark tone, he tells June that it would be better for him to watch what he says, unless he was looking to lose his life. The boy starts running desperately, apologizing after that. Black started showing the protagonist that now it liked it, and shortly after, they returned home. After some time they were in the room, and the creature was upset. Jamie says he knows what he did wrong, and that he wouldn't let him off the leash if he did it again. This caused Black's mood to change. The protagonist kept wondering where that creature had learned to act that way, and lay down on his bed, feeling exhausted. He had used more energy than he thought he would need and began to imagine that he would probably only get busier from that moment on, after living a carefree life until then. But he also didn't think that a god would appear in his life and territory. On top of that, the god he disliked the most, Genis. But angry, he thought that if this was what Genis wanted, then he could appear, and it wouldn't matter how many followers he had. Changing his mood, he was now willing to pursue them all. Meanwhile, in the city, Hyun was stunned to see Azard and asked how he was alive, but now the undead said he had asked where the older brother was. The man trembled, and said that Han had told them he would take their lives with his own hands, so how were they still there? Azard threw a punch, passing by Hyun's head and hitting the wall directly. The big guy said he wouldn't ask again, which made the man wonder what kind of strength that was, but he thought that the most important thing was that he couldn't hear any other members, as they would have caused a commotion if they knew Jance had returned. Hyun said that, first of all, he didn't know where the older brother was, but began to assume that they had all been defeated. Raiza approached and asked if that was true. The thug started trembling when he saw the former Philip, who came closer and asked again if that was true. Hyun said yes, and that he could ask anyone else, and they would all say the same thing. The undead thought this was brotherly because he needed his boss to fulfill his master's command, but knowing the boss received reports, he must have known something about Genis. Then he changed his mood and asked if he could guess where the master was. Hyun, frightened, thought he needed to give an appropriate answer this time, or he would lose his head. So he said that, since the boss liked women and drinks, they should look in the bars associated with the group. Azard told his partner that this thug could be right. Raiza said that they would check the bars then. After that they turned, and Hyun breathed a sigh of relief, thinking he was saved. But the big guy came back and punched the man hard. After knocking him out, he asked his partner if they couldn't take that person to the master, and that they just needed to decide where to lock him up or tie him up in the forest. Raiza said that wasn't a bad idea, but it would be better to put him in the storage of his house. They grabbed Hyun and left, saying they had wasted too much time there. After a while, Jun went to the hideout of his group, but upon opening the door, he noticed there were people lifeless inside. Still, he entered, and seeing that, wondered what had happened in that place. Everyone was lifeless, and he thought he would be beaten for not fulfilling his quota, but there was no one there to hit him. So he started running, planning to flee for now, before any misunderstanding occurred with the other members. It didn't take long until dawn, and the protagonist woke up, admitting that he was really exhausted. He hadn't thought he would wake up at that time, and because of that, he thought he wouldn't be able to avoid them that day. It wasn't long before he got up, and while walking through the halls, he told Black that he would cancel his summoning for now, since his father could feel his presence. After reaching the dining room, the protagonist asked his father and mother if they had slept well. The Count cheerfully said yes to his son, while little Sarah told her brother that she had slept well that night. Jamie, seeing that his mother wasn't there, asked where she was. Suddenly, Sears jumped onto the protagonist and said she was right there. The boy said she hid very well, but in reality the protagonist knew where his mother was, he just didn't want to show it. The woman strokes her son's head and asks if he was scared. He replies that he was, but it had been fun. Sears is delighted to see Jamie like that, and says that he was very good-natured. The protagonist, feeling awkward about it, tells his mother that they should start eating, but the woman says he's so cute and wants to hug him again. His sister also starts hugging him. Jamie was already wishing someone would take them away. After the hugs, they sat down to eat, and Jamie began to notice how his mother treated Sarah, and he thought he also wanted to rub his sister's cheeks, but the feeling quickly passed, making him bang his head on the table, wondering why he was thinking about this, as he couldn't believe he had gotten used to so much peace. After they finished eating, the Count was talking to his wife about something that would happen the next day. Jamie, who was playing with his sister, even stopped playing to find out what it was. Argeneo asked Sears if she hadn't told the children. The woman said she had forgotten, and it was because her son had made her worry. The protagonist started thinking that she might be talking about that incident with the full-body breathing technique, as his mother must have suffered a lot judging by her personality, so he apologized. Sears said she was fine now, knowing that nothing had happened, but if he kept pushing himself like that day, she warned that he could collapse in the middle of the corridors from being so upset. The protagonist said he wouldn't do something like that again. He then asked what was going to happen the next day. Sears started laughing and said that the next day they would be attending a large ball organized by Count Simon and Count Welton, where most of the nobles living in the northern part of the Seldom Empire were expected to attend. The woman told her children that they hadn't been to a ball before, but since they had reached an age where they should go to these types of places, she was excited. But the protagonist, hearing this, thought that his precious free time was going to disappear. But that same night, he was ready to leave again, and after summoning Black, he went to the window to head to the city to visit his servants. They flew straight to the undead hideout. The protagonist went right in. Azard was surprised to see his master. Jamie asked if they had done what he had asked. Raiza said they regretted it, as they hadn't found anything about the Genus Church up until that moment, since the cult had not been established for long. After hearing that, the protagonist deduced that it made sense, as he thought even Livol members would have trouble retrieving information in just one day. So, he asked about the other matter. His servants said they had found a person, and that she was tied up there. Hyun, seeing the boy with hair of that color, couldn't believe he was face to face with someone from the Welton family. Raiza says that the man is a member of Livol, and that he knew they wanted to kill them, which meant he was part of the inner circle. Azard says he had interrogated him, but he wouldn't say anything. The protagonist orders them to remove the gag from the man. Once it was removed, Hyun started screaming, begging for his life to be spared, and claiming he truly didn't know anything, but that if they let him live, he could get any information. However, when he stopped speaking, he began to feel chills, which terrified him. Jamie says he had no intention of taking his life, and that he only needed him to carry out a task. The criminal felt an immense amount of threatening energy. Then he started shouting again, saying he would do anything they asked but begged them to spare his life. The protagonist told him he was too loud, and that there was only one thing he needed to do. Hyun, still kneeling, couldn't understand why his voice wouldn't come out. Jamie placed his hand on the bandit's head and used his magic. He ordered Hyun to go to the Count immediately and report what the organization had done. The man, now transformed into a servant, stood up without saying anything and began walking toward the door. Azard and Raiza stood watching, confused. The protagonist explained that they shouldn't feel sorry for him and that he wouldn't be pursued by the organization, as the Count would deal with him before that happened. But he added that the two should leave the city and hide. Black nudged his master, as if pointing out something strange. Jamie asked why he wasn't responding. The servants bowed and said the master's orders were absolute, and they simply followed them. Raiza told the protagonist that he believed he understood the reason behind that order. The protagonist replied that he was correct, and thought that his father would probably exterminate Livol, and in that process, the existence of the two was insignificant. Jamie warned that he would be away for a few days, and asked them to remain discreet. He then left the hideout. While on the street, Raiza began to shout for the master, who stopped immediately and asked what it was. The thug started speaking, saying that he already knew they had become corpses, and had accepted it because it was inevitable, but he also didn't want to return to the previous state because he was satisfied with the power he had now. Still, he wanted to know what kind of being he was. The protagonist asked what exactly he wanted to know. Raiza replied that their strength had increased exponentially compared to when they were alive. Then, he asked if they had become high-class undead. Jamie was stunned when he heard this. The undead, shocked, began to apologize and asked if he had asked a stupid question. The protagonist laughed and said it was funny, as he had never seen anyone adapt so quickly like they did. Now, frightened, Raiza thanked him after hearing that. Jamie admitted that he had never seen anything like that in his entire life, as most of the time, they refused to accept their state after losing their humanity and becoming monsters. But these guys were the complete opposite. He acknowledged that he might have gathered some good gems. The protagonist explained to his servants that they were just zombies and that their appearance had been preserved as it was before, but after becoming zombies, their strength had increased. Raiza said that now he understood and that they were just normal zombies. Jamie laughed and said that you never know. Depending on what they did, they could become high-class zombies. The servants got excited upon hearing that. The protagonist then turned and said he was leaving, asking them to stay hidden. Black commented to his master that they were pathetic, but Jamie asked him not to call them that, as he found them interesting. They reminded him of someone from the past. In any case, he had spent too much time there and decided it was best to return home. That night, there was a great commotion at the Welton house. A member of Livol, a large criminal organization rooted in Heiss, accused his own organization. The Count had to delay his departure to handle all the issues. Only 3 people were heading to Reagan, the largest commercial city in the East. Upon learning this, the protagonist thought he could get there instantly with a single teleportation spell. Inside the carriage, with his mother and sister, Jamie admitted that things were better now compared to the old times. They had made so much progress that it couldn't even be compared to the mythical eras, but he didn't know how much time had passed since his other life. The events of the eras after his defeat were written in history books. The demon species invaded, and the demon lord also appeared. But it was clear that the last few hundred years had been peaceful, with none of these things happening. The protagonist thought that perhaps he himself was responsible for ending that peace. Those 12 stupid gods. They barely managed to unite throughout all the time that passed. Jamie thought he would be able to bring them down more easily than last time, even if countless lives were lost in the process. But that wasn't his concern. As they traveled, his sister slept through the journey, and the protagonist focused on absorbing mana. He admitted that, first and foremost, they would pass through the ball safely. After some time of travel, they arrived at their final destination and began crossing the city. The protagonist, looking out the window, commented that Reagan was truly an amazing place. His mother said that it was the largest commercial city in the kingdom and that there were no other places like it, moving a great amount of money. Jamie knew that Reagan was the main reason why the Seldom Kingdom was so rich, and he thought that this was more than enough to prove its worth. They were now approaching the palace, and the protagonist told his mother that his heart was racing just thinking about meeting Count Simon. Sears hugged Jamie, saying he was such a cute son and must be nervous, continuing with loving words to calm him down. After much hugging, the woman commented that Count Simon was someone her son admired because he aspired to be a mage. Stunned, the protagonist replied that, yes. Sears said that Simon was incredible, a great mage who reached 7th class at the same age as Jamie's father. He was one of the 2 leaders of the noble group. Additionally, his magic resembled a red lotus, which is why his nickname was the Red Lotus Mage. But it's said that he had taken hundreds of lives with those abilities. Hearing this, the protagonist asked what kind of person that count was. The woman thought for a moment and replied that he was an impressive person with blood-colored hair. Jamie was a bit confused, but admitted that he wasn't interested in the Red Lotus Mage or 7th class. What intrigued him was the power that, it was said, took thousands of lives in a single attack. This made him curious about the magic capable of such a feat, and that's why he wanted to talk to Simon. He remembered the brief and confusing conversation he had with Marquis Unmel, and now wondered what kind of conversation he would have with Count Simon. After the carriage stopped, Sears got out and asked her children to follow her. Shortly after, the protagonist stepped out, following his mother. A servant approached and asked if she was the wife of Count Welton. Sears replied yes. The man then said he would guide them through the castle. After entering, they were taken directly to the room. Akira commented that they could stay there during the ball and that, should they have any problems, they could simply call the personal butler. Sears remarked to the protagonist that the Count was being attentive to them, and the boy agreed with his mother. The butler addressed Jamie as young master and informed him that he would be using another room. The protagonist was pleased to hear this, as he didn't want to share a room with his parents. His mother told him to return as soon as he finished unpacking his things. After a few minutes, Sears was getting ready with the help of the maids, who were impressed by her beauty. Jamie was also impressed when he saw her and complimented her, saying she looked beautiful. Sears was delighted to hear that and said she was very happy. She also commented that Jamie looked handsome and, wanting to hug him, the maids asked her to control herself so as not to ruin her makeup. Furious, she turned to the maids and asked if she could at least hug him once. The maids replied no, as the dress could get wrinkled. Soon Sarah appeared, already ready after her preparations. Sears was even more enchanted to see her daughter that way. Jamie also complimented his sister, saying she looked beautiful, like a doll. The girl was happy to hear her brother's compliment, but commented that she was uncomfortable wearing that outfit. He reassured her, saying they would bear it for a little while. The butlers informed the protagonist that he also needed to change for the ball. After everyone was ready, they headed to the main hall, where many guests had already arrived. They were impressed by the size of Count Simon's banquet hall. Jamie commented to his mother that Count Simon's taste was very extravagant. The woman agreed, and said that he would be even more surprised when he saw him. 2 women appeared and began complimenting Sears, saying she looked beautiful even after all this time, and highlighted how lovely the dress she was wearing was. She thanked the ladies for their kindness, while the protagonist, hearing all of this, thought they were just trying to make a good impression. During the mythical age, which isn't even recorded in history, fools subjected themselves to everything for the gods. The protagonist found this disgusting but admitted that his mother was good at dealing with people like that. A man in the middle of the hall asked if everyone could hear him and began to say, "Esteemed guests, welcome to the ball organized by the Simon family." He introduced himself as Rivol and informed them that he was in charge of administering the Regent territory. Smiling, he announced that the ball would begin shortly and kindly asked everyone to remain seated in their designated places. as they would soon be receiving Count Simon and his family. Soon, the Red Lotus mage began descending the stairs. The protagonist was impressed when he saw him. Simon, while descending, began saying that it had been a while since everyone had been waiting. Jamie was amazed by that power. The Count said that everyone was welcome to the ball and wished them an enjoyable stay. The protagonist couldn't believe that Simon was just a 7th-class mage. He deduced that he might be on the same level as the Marquis, or even stronger. He was pleased to know that the Red Lotus mage was beyond his expectations. Simon approached the Welton family's table and greeted Madame Welton, saying it had been a long time since he had seen her, but she looked even better than the previous year. Sears stood up and greeted him, asking him not to say that, and commented that she was also happy to see him. The Count asked why Count Welton had not attended the ball. The woman replied that he wouldn't be present that night, as he was dealing with a problem in the territory. Simon said he understood, and asked if the boy was their son. Sears confirmed and introduced her children, Jamie, the oldest, and Sarah, her youngest daughter. She asked them to introduce themselves. The protagonist stood up and said that he was the eldest son of the Welton family. The girl also greeted him, stating her name. Hannah, another guest, praised Sears, saying her children were beautiful. Madame Welton thanked her and commented that they were intelligent children. Meanwhile, the protagonist couldn't stop observing the Count, who soon noticed that the boy was examining every detail of his presence. Jamie didn't waste any time, and began concentrating a little magic in his hand, as if wanting Simon to notice. The Count notices, likes what he sees, and asks the protagonist's name, to which Jamie responds enthusiastically. Simon says they would meet again at another time, which excites Jamie even more. After that, the Count leaves, and the protagonist admits that Simon exceeded his expectations, making him even more eager to talk to him. After the greetings, the Count's family begins walking toward the main table. Jiho, Simon's son, was paying attention to Jamie, who asked his mother when his father would arrive. After the Count's family sat down, Jiho asked his father what he thought of the eldest son of the Welton family. Simon, curious, asked why Jiho was so interested in a 10-year-old boy. Jiho replied that, although young, Jamie would lead the Welton family in the future, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to learn more about him, as they belonged to the same generation. Count Simon had heard rumors that his son commanded other noble children, and acted as if he were their leader. It seemed that Jiho wanted Simon's recognition, but the Count thought that was pointless. However, he decided to play along with his son. Simon commented that Jamie was a smart child. Jiho, curious, asked if there was anything else. Simon, however, didn't add anything and asked the butler to bring drinks to the table. Hannah took Jiho's hand and asked him to get along with Jamie since the Welton family had been their allies for a long time. Jiho, confidently, told his mother not to worry. She laughed and replied that, in that case, everything was fine. She also asked for drinks for herself. Meanwhile, the boy changed his mood and apologized to his mother only in his thoughts, as he had no intention of having a good relationship with Jamie. He was sure he would make him kneel. As he thought about what to do, the Count approached, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said that it was as expected of his son. The boy thought that now he would be recognized by his father. His brother Tuan observed all these reactions and began to wonder what was to come. After some time since the ball began, Sears told the protagonist that he should find some friends. He agreed with her and started walking through the hall. He silently thanked his mother, happy that he now had some free time to find a quiet place alone. Jamie left the hall and began walking outside the castle. He passed through several places, such as the garden and the flower shop. The protagonist was amazed, as Simon didn't just seem to have a talent for magic but also for business. Jamie, speaking to himself, said he was looking forward to meeting the Count again. However, without expecting it, someone behind him asked who he wanted to talk to. Immediately he created a magic weapon and turned to attack, but upon realizing it was a girl, he stopped his attack midway. He started staring at her, but quickly made his weapon disappear. The girl, startled, screamed, asking how he could suddenly point that at her. The protagonist replied that he hadn't asked anyone to appear behind him suddenly. The girl, outraged, said he was rude for pointing something at a lady. Jamie retorted, saying she should be grateful he didn't stab her. Even so, he asked who she was and how she had appeared behind him. Ash, excited, asked if he wanted to know who she was, but hesitated, still in shock. The protagonist admitted that the girl annoyed him, both for completely hiding her presence and for the way she spoke. He declared that he wasn't in the mood for games, and shot another spell at Ash, aiming for her feet. The girl, seeing that, became even more frightened. Jamie explained that it was an air bullet, a second-class magic, and that if someone didn't have enough magical resistance, it could easily pierce the skin and muscles, even capable of taking the life of a child. Ash was stunned upon hearing this, and began wondering what kind of child he was. Jamie asked if she still didn't want to answer. Terrified, the girl said that she really wanted to answer who he was. The protagonist ordered her to speak quickly before he shot again. Without hesitation, Ash reveals that her name is Ash from the Ballet family, the second daughter of the family and also a spiritual mage. She explains that the term spiritual mage refers to those who make contracts with spirits, mystical beings born of nature. On the continent, there weren't many spiritual mages. They were considered highly talented individuals and were granted the status of barons simply for being spiritual mages. Observing Ash, the protagonist begins to wonder if she really was a spiritual mage. Now he knew that thanks to the wind spirit, the girl had managed to approach him without making any noise. Jamie remembers that, at his peak, no spirit could hide from him. Still, he admits it was impressive. At most, Ash appeared to be around his age, yet she was already a spiritual mage. Typically, people start training affinity with nature after they turn 10, but this girl seemed to have been born with a natural affinity. He imagines that, if she started proper training, she could even form a contract with the Spirit King. Ash tells the protagonist that, since he knew who she was, he should now tell her who he was and why he was using such dangerous magic. Jamie is impressed that the girl asked for his identity right after revealing hers, thinking that she wasn't someone who gave things up easily. Ash insists, saying she wanted to know his name because he was the only one there. The protagonist responds with his name, saying he is Jamie Welton, the heir to the Welton family, and that it was a pleasure to meet her. Another piece of information about the Ballet family is that they are loyal subordinates of Count Welton. Meanwhile, Count Argeneo was interrogating a criminal and said that he hadn't minded leaving the organization alone, but somehow it had a positive effect. The man was already quite injured. Even so, the Count lifted his head with his feet and asked how they dared to traffic humans in his territory. According to him, this was something they shouldn't have dared to do, unless they were crazy or wanted to lose their lives. Then, he asked the man if he was looking to lose his life, as he would grant his wish. The bandit began pleading with the Count not to do it, but Argeneo turned away and ordered his subordinates to hang the man the next day. They replied that they understood the order. The Count then asked them to prepare his carriage, as he would leave immediately. As he left the castle to attend the ball, the group of criminals being investigated was scattered through the forest, organizing themselves into several parts. Now, with Livel's initial plan failing, they were preparing Plan B. Meanwhile, in the garden, Jamie continued walking, no longer paying attention to the girl, until he became frustrated, turned around, and shouted, asking why she was following him. He said that the fact that her father was a servant of his father had nothing to do with them. Ash, terrified, began to stammer as she tried to respond. The protagonist grabbed her arm and warned that he was leaving, and she shouldn't follow him. The girl grabbed Jamie's arm, which he didn't like one bit. He then turned and asked why it bothered him so much. Ash screamed, saying that it was the first time she had met someone her age and that she just wanted to be his friend. The protagonist was stunned to hear that, as he hadn't imagined that was the reason. He wondered why she needed him as a friend and, awkwardly, thought that maybe this was important to her. Still, Jamie thought that it wasn't his problem. He started walking again and told Ash to find someone else, as he didn't need friends. The girl ran after him, calling him stingy. Jamie didn't like the idea of having friends, and she didn't understand how friends or any kind of close relationship made him lose his reason. For him, if he had avoided such emotions from the beginning, his past wouldn't have experienced something like that. Even so, the protagonist admitted that Ash made him remember something unpleasant. As he walked, he heard someone calling for him. Jamie stops immediately and turns to see who it is. He sees Chiho and his friends and deduces that, with his red hair, Chiho must be the son of Count Simon. Jamie asks why he was calling him. Tuan, indignant, asks how Jamie dares to speak so disrespectfully to his brother. Kwang explains that Chiho is the eldest son and heir of the Simon family. The protagonist responds that they are making too much noise and asks for silence. The boys are surprised by his attitude and begin shouting at him, but Jamie silences them. Chiho, startled, asks if the protagonist cast a silence spell. Jamie replies that he guessed correctly, saying Chiho was a little better than the other boys. The Count's son asks if Jamie hadn't noticed that he was older. Jamie responds that there was no need to focus on details and suggests they get straight to the point. The protagonist prepares to cast another spell, and Chiho, frightened, hastily says he wasn't there to fight. He says he just wanted a small conversation, and comments that Jamie is impressive for using that spell. Jamie replies that he didn't need to listen to him chatter, and insists that he get straight to the point. Chiho, terrified, asks if Jamie knew who he was. Jamie replies that he knew. He was the son of Count Simon. The boy, more relieved, suggests that now they could have a more peaceful conversation since Jamie was the son of Count Welton. Jiho explains that the reason they were acting like that was because of the informal way Jamie addressed them. The protagonist finds this ridiculous and deduces that the group was probably trying to suppress his strength. Jiho comments that, as they would be the core of the Eastern nobility in the future, he thought it would be good for them to become close from a young age. Jamie realizes that the boy was just stalling and actually wanted him to become his subordinate. The protagonist feels a deep sense of contempt for having to hear something so pathetic, and then says that he wanted none of that, had no interest, and that Jiho could leave. Jiho gets furious and asks if he was really going to reject his offer, saying he was already losing his patience. Starting to use his abilities, Jiho threatens that he would crush Jamie's half-baked magic and force him to serve him like a boss. Jamie stands still, observing, and then starts laughing. He comments that in fact, their plan was to use brute force from the beginning. Jiho confirms, saying that the plan changed a little, but that he would now do it the usual way. For Jamie, the two-faced attitude of that boy at his age was disgusting. Then, the protagonist asks if Jiho thought the adults would allow him to do whatever he wanted, stating that the boy would be in serious trouble if something happened. Jiho responds that Jamie didn't need to worry about that, because with the item he was holding, no one would be able to see them. He then throws a magical item to the ground, creating an illusion magic field. The Count's son says that, even if Jamie understood magic, he would soon beg for mercy. He then cancels the spells on his subordinates, who breathe a sigh of relief after being silent for a while. Shortly after, the boys start intimidating the protagonist, asking if he wanted to be defeated, and if he wasn't scared. Jamie ignores the boys and focuses on the magical field. Tuan asks if Jamie hadn't heard that he wouldn't be forgiven. The protagonist, laughing, comments that the situation was interesting. Jiho, irritated, asks what was so interesting, as it seemed like Jamie hadn't understood the gravity of the situation he was in. The protagonist starts using his pain magic, frightening the boys with his aura. He also warns them not to deactivate the artifact, because if they did, they would all witness absolute agony. The group was now on their knees, suffering from the damage caused by Jamie. After a while, the magical field dissipates, and Jamie leaves the boys collapsed, still suffering. Weakened, Jiho coughed heavily and began thinking that he wouldn't forgive Jamie. Despite this, Jiho wondered why he lacked power, coming to the conclusion that Jamie was a fourth-class mage, while he himself was only a second-class mage. Crying, Jiho couldn't understand how something like this could happen, as to him, the protagonist had been born into a family of knights, and it was hard to comprehend how someone from the Welton family, specialists in swordsmanship, had become so skilled in magic. Frustrated, Jiho felt that he didn't have enough talent. Still crying, he stood up and shouted that he wouldn't forgive Jamie, claiming he couldn't tolerate it and needed to crush him so that he would never be able to use magic again. After all the commotion, Jiho's group started talking. Tuan asked if Jiho was sure that stealing an artifact was a good idea. Jiho replied that it was fine and told them to be quiet. Before they could do anything, someone called for Jiho. It was his brother, Lennon, who had arrived. Jiho, irritated, asked his brother what had brought him there. Lennon commented that Jiho was very cold and asked how he could stand still when their older brother had been hurt. After saying that, Lennon showed an item he had obtained. Jiho was impressed when he saw the object and asked where he got something so dangerous. Lennon smiled and said it didn't matter, but now they should show the little Welton brat who he had messed with. Furious, Jiho stated that it didn't matter where the item came from. What mattered now was crushing Jamie Welton. That night, Count Arjano's carriage arrived in the kingdom. As he disembarked, he was greeted by Simon, who happily commented that it had been a long time since they last met. Count Welton asked if Simon was there personally to meet him, as the sun should soon be rising in the west. The Red Lotus mage asked how Arjano was and commented that there was no reason for him to be upset. Inside the castle, the swordsman asked how the ball had gone. Simon replied that it was the same as always, but that he had met his son. Count Welton asked what Simon thought of Jamie. The mage asked if he truly loved his children. The swordsman responded that they were the reason for his life. Simon said that he envied how deeply he could love them. Arjano then asked his friend if he was still facing any problems. The Red Lotus mage was speechless, but then commented that Jamie was an impressive child, completely different from any other. Count Welton realized that something was wrong, as Simon was dodging the question. He then began to smile and asked if Simon also thought his son had some talent. The mage laughed and replied that Jamie didn't just have a simple talent. He was the best Simon had ever seen. No human with such talent had ever existed before. Arjano said that Marquis Unmil had said the same thing. The Red Lotus mage asked when the Marquis had met Jamie. Count Welton began to speak, saying that he had always known about Jamie's talent since he was young, but had no idea that he was so exceptional. He then shared that he had asked the Marquis if, given Jamie's natural magic, it would be beneficial for everyone for him to become a mage. Simon asked if Unmul had become Jamie's teacher, as he was incredible. Argino responded that the Marquis had refused. The Red Lotus mage said that he understood the decision, as the child was a genius beyond comprehension. He remarked that Jamie had awakened his talent on his own and was challenging the barrier that separates mages from the legendary 9th class. Because of this, Simon felt envious of Jamie's natural talent, greater even than his own. As a mage, Simon confessed that he wished to see with his own eyes what someone like Jamie, with the potential to reach the pinnacle of wisdom, could do. Argeno was stunned to hear this. Simon continued, saying that humans were very fragile. Although they had built great civilizations, that was only grand in human terms. Compared to dragons and great elven mages, humans were very weak. He emphasized that it was only thanks to swordmasters like Argeno that humans could maintain their status. But if a 9th class mage were to be born, not even dragons, the center of magic, could underestimate humans. Simon says that he dreams of humans becoming the rulers of the world. Count Welton comments that this was nothing but arrogance, but the mage responds that it's fine if he thinks that way, as Simon knew better than anyone about the lost history that these lands held. Argeno begins to reflect on this, the secret history known only to a few. Around 10,000 years ago, an event destroyed all the history that existed. This secret had never been shared with the human race, and Simon believed that humans needed to build a strength that could match these threats, ensuring that their history and civilization would not be erased again by an unknown force. After the conversation, the mage suggests that Argeno rest, as it was already late. The swordsman thanks him and wishes Simon a good night. Count Welton goes to his family's room and sees Jamie sleeping. He thinks about the expectations people have for his son, such great talent that it makes him worry as a father. But above all, Jamie was his beloved son. He promises himself that he will do his best to ensure Jamie grows up safely. The next day at the castle, the festivities were still ongoing. The protagonist wondered why his father had been so disturbed the previous night. He knew that it wasn't a situation where he could use magic to control his father's mind and satisfy his curiosity. While Jamie was reflecting, Ash appears calling for him. The protagonist says he has nothing to talk about with her. The girl, smiling, responds that she, in fact, has something to say. Then she starts shouting for Jamie's sister. The protagonist can't believe Ash invited more people. Jamie stands up and says he's leaving, stating he wouldn't go with Ash. The girl asks where he's going and says that at least he should greet them, as their families were close. His older sister, Rebecca, comments that she should speak more politely, as this was the son of the Count. The protagonist is stunned to see Rebecca. Ash notices something strange and asks if Jamie had fallen in love with his sister or something like that. Jamie is perplexed, not understanding how that girl was there, as she looked like Jane, the only person he had ever loved in his entire life and the only one who had sacrificed herself to the gods for him. Jane was the reason Diablo Volfir had become a monster without any emotion. The protagonist couldn't believe Jane could appear before him again, but before he could speak further, Jiho appears and says he has finally found him. Holding a magical item, Jiho glares at Jamie, thinking that now he would defeat him. Jamie, however, couldn't take his eyes off Rebecca and called her Jane. Rebecca, confused, starts staring at him. Ash, seeing the scene, asks Jamie if he had really fallen in love with Rebecca at first sight. The son of Count Simon, still present, interrupts and states that from now on, Jamie should refer to him as Sir. Jiho then charges at Jamie. Ash gets scared, realizing she's in the middle of a fight. Rebecca runs to protect her sister. Jamie orders Jiho not to stand in his way and easily dispels the magic from the item. This leaves Jiho stunned, as the Phoenix Spectre was a 6th class fire magic created by his father, something a brat should not be able to block. Jiho couldn't understand how this was possible. Jamie, looking at him, states that now Jiho would be defeated and begins to use his magic, freezing part of the boy's body. Jiho does nothing to react, and his body is overtaken by ice as Jamie, enraged, intensifies the attack. At that moment, Argeno appears, places his hand in front of Jamie's eyes, and tells him to stop. Jamie asks if it's his father. Count Welton replies that it is, and everything is fine. Gradually, Jamie starts to calm down, and looks back at Rebecca, who was scared along with Ash. This left him feeling awkward, and he fainted in his father's arms. Argeno began to wonder if Jamie had really tried to take Jiho's life. Although he wanted to believe it was just a mistake, He knew something so serious couldn't be explained as a mere misunderstanding. If they hadn't intervened, Chiho could have lost his life. Simon, even seeing his son being attacked, found it all incredible. He acknowledged that, although Chiho had an inferior ability and the artifact's power was reduced by half, the magic activated should have thrown the hall into chaos and flames. For Jamie to dispel the spell so easily, Simon concluded that he truly had the potential to reach the 9th class and fulfill Simon's dream of changing the fate of humans. Hana, holding Chiho, says that Jamie tried to harm her son and asks Sears if she would let that slide. Enraged, Madame Welton responds that Hana should tell the whole truth, as it was Chiho who started the fight, attacking Jamie with the artifact. Sears then asks Hana if this wasn't true. Hana, indignant, responds that Chiho was just playing around. This makes Sears even angrier, and she demands Hana speak more clearly. Before the conversation could continue, Sears yells, demanding that Hana tell the entire truth, until Argeno intervenes and says it's time to stop. Simon steps forward and says he will personally check what precious Jamie had done. Hana freezes when she hears this. Fearful, she looks at the Count and calls out to him. Realizing he is heading towards Argeno, she thinks that, despite being cold, Simon still cared about his son. The Red Lotus mage declares to Count Welton that Chiho had gravely insulted everyone there that day. This leaves Hana desperate. Simon apologizes to Sears, saying he's sorry for what happened, as he can see how upset she is. Everyone is shocked by what had occurred. Madame Welton admits that the Count was more astute than she had thought, and since he had apologized, she could no longer stay angry. She thanks him and says it would be better if she withdrew. The Red Lotus mage suggests to Argeno that he should also go home and rest for a bit. After that, Simon apologizes to everyone for ruining the event and informs them that the festivities would be ending that day. Everyone begins to leave the hall, leaving only Simon and his family. Hana questions how he could have done that, claiming Chiho was his son and that he got hurt because of Jamie. The Count looks at his wife sternly and tells her to shut up, as there were many eyes watching. He orders her to take Chiho to his room. Hana is stunned by Simon's attitude. After some time, in the room, Chiho regains consciousness. Hana continues complaining to the Count, asking how he could act that way, considering it was his son. Simon doesn't respond to his wife but asks the boy if he wanted his attention. Furious, he says Chiho had no right to stay silent. Simon explains that Chiho's actions could negatively affect not only their relationship in the Northeast, but also with the entire kingdom. Chiho, trembling with fear, admits that he just wanted his father's attention and that he thought Jamie was full of himself. He confesses that he didn't know things would take this turn. Simon asks who had given the Phoenix Spectre to Chiho. The boy begins to stammer, afraid to answer. The Count warns that he doesn't like to repeat questions and will ask just one more time who gave him the artifact. Crying, Chiho says it was Lennon. The Count asks for his youngest son to be called, and Lennon soon appears in the room, asking what his father wanted. Upon seeing Chiho crying, Lennon deduces that he had failed and calls him an idiot. Still, he decides to act pure and innocent, smiling while asking his father what he needed. Simon asks if it was Lennon who gave the Phoenix Spectre to Chiho. Lennon responds affirmatively. The mage questions why he gave something so dangerous to his brother. Lennon says he just wanted to help Chiho because he didn't want to see him lose to a brat. Hearing this, Simon states that it's a lie, and that Lennon just wanted to manipulate his brother. Lennon doesn't understand how his father knew this, and now both brothers were terrified. The Count says that they should have already realized that he had no interest in either of them. He asks if they knew the reason. Simon explains that, even though they share his blood, they do not possess the talent he expected. However, this does not mean he does not know what they are thinking. The Count declares that if they want his attention, they need to stop wasting time with tricks like that, and instead prove they are worthy of his lineage. Opening the bedroom door, Simon warns that he will not interfere with anything they do, but they will clean up the mess themselves. He orders them to apologize to Jamie as soon as the sun rises, and to continue apologizing until he forgives them. Chiho can't believe he will have to see the protagonist again, as just thinking about it sends chills down his spine. He asks Lennon if he is going to apologize too. Lennon, however, doesn't respond, looking shocked by what their father had said. Meanwhile, Lennon remembers Simon's statement that they should prove they were worthy of his lineage. Paralyzed, but determined, Lennon promises himself he will prove his worth. Meanwhile, Jamie sleeps, and his mother is by his side. Sears is worried, thinking that the hatred Jamie felt for Chiho was real. She didn't understand how something like this could happen to a child of only 9 years. She reflects that she thought it was just a normal fight between children, but if the artifact had been activated properly, it could have caused significant damage to Jamie. Still upset, Sears thinks she can't forgive Chiho, even though the Count apologized. She concludes she will need a better apology or compensation, even if she has to turn to her family. The woman is startled when she sees her son moving in bed but soon goes back to her thoughts. Sears regrets thinking this when, suddenly, Argeno approaches and asks if everything is okay. The woman, still sad, replies that there is no reason not to be okay. Count Welton asks if there is anything she would like him to do. Awkwardly, Madame Welton comments that he interrupted her earlier. Argeno explains that he was just concerned that it might ruin her mood further. Sears mentions that Simon apologized appropriately in the hall and that she didn't want to cause a division among the northern nobles over this. Additionally, Chiho seemed to have been properly reprimanded. After talking about the matter, they discuss whether they should leave or rest a bit more, while the protagonist, covered in bed, overhears everything. Jamie, though covered, is awake. He soon uncovers his head and admits that he understands his parents' concerns, but he simply couldn't control himself at that moment. Then he gets up and starts remembering Jane. He never imagined that she had reincarnated. However, upon reflection, Jamie concludes that it wasn't that strange, as even he himself had reincarnated after 10,000 years. Jane's reincarnation seemed inevitable. However, she did not recognize him, which meant she did not have the memories of her past life. Jamie thinks this is normal because he is a special case. Still, he never imagined that Jane would reincarnate at the same time as him. To him, this was a true irony of fate or someone's plan. Perhaps it was even a plan by the 12 gods. Black approaches his master and whispers something in his ear. The protagonist agrees with the creature, reflecting that if anyone knew about his reincarnation, no one would leave him alone. But then he changes his mind and wonders why he's thinking about this. He then becomes sad and begins to remember Jane injured in his past life. These memories leave him pensive, and he decides that first, he needs to find her again. Meanwhile, a messenger attaches a note to a pigeon and comments that the world of magic is undergoing a great change. The note tied to the pigeon's leg reads, "The eldest son of the Welton family, Jamie, is only 9 years old, but it is presumed he is already, at least, a 4th-class mage, a very talented genius." Several animals are carrying this news to different places. The next day, Jamie walks through the forest accompanied by Black, who seems to enjoy being in this place. The protagonist asks the creature if it can feel the fresh air of the place. Impressed, the protagonist continues walking and talking to his summon. After a while, he says that the place was quiet and pleasant, probably because most people had already left since it was the last day. Still walking, he admits that he needs to find Rebecca before heading back home. But suddenly, he hears the sound of rain, even though it wasn't raining. Jamie starts searching everywhere to find where the sound was coming from. Not being able to see, he decides to expand his mana. It doesn't take long for him to find the source of the sound and begin walking toward it. When he reaches the edge of the lake, he finds Rebecca talking to a being called Undine. The girl notices someone approaching, so she asks who is there. Upon realizing it was Jamie, she stands up and asks if everything is okay. He responds that yes, and, excited, asks for her name. Smiling at how he asked, she says her name is Rebecca Ballet, and she is a water elementalist. The protagonist starts to change his mood and remembers that, like Jane, she too was a water elementalist. He recalls his past life when she told him not to forget her. Rebecca calls Jamie, who was paralyzed, and asks why he looked so sad. The protagonist was remembering when he was still Diablo. The girl deduces that he was probably still in shock from what had happened. She gets closer and hugs him, saying that everything would be fine. Jamie, after being hugged, thinks that feeling was just remnants of his past. The girl says it's okay to enjoy that a bit longer. After the hug, they sit by the lake, and Rebecca asks if Jamie is feeling better. He replies that he is. Smiling, the Duchess Ballet says that her father taught her that difficulties pass quickly when you share the burden with others. The protagonist asks if she was talking about Viscount Ballet. Smiling, the girl replies that yes, and she was sad that they couldn't continue talking, so she was grateful to have had that moment. Jamie says that he was thinking the same way. The girl, excited, asks if it was serious. The protagonist replies that it is, and realizes that the girl is different, and that maybe it's better this way. He then says he heard that it's a tradition in the Ballet family to make contracts with wind elementals. Rebecca says she wanted to, but it didn't work out. Even though she has great elemental affinity with them, the wind elementals visit her, but refuse to make the contract and leave after meeting her. Until one day, an Undine appeared and said it was her destiny to make a contract with her. This was an important decision, and she should have spoken to her father first, but she accidentally ended up making the contract right there. At that moment, the protagonist imagines that the Elemental King must have known about it. A contract made with an Elemental King, unlike other elemental contracts, is a soul contract, made in each other's lifetime. When Jane's soul reincarnated as Rebecca, the Elemental King must have noticed. Jamie asks if the Viscount reprimanded her for doing that. The girl says he didn't get angry but seemed a little disappointed. However, it was something special to her. The protagonist says that for an elemental to approach someone and ask them to form a contract was something he had never heard of happening. And it's a shame it's not what the elemental she would want, but she was chosen by the water elemental, so she should believe in herself. Rebecca is surprised to hear that and thanks Jamie for saying it. He stands up and begins to say goodbye, saying he's leaving. The girl, watching him leave, says goodbye but thinks she wanted to talk more. And, annoyed, she starts to wonder why she felt that way. As Jamie was heading back, he told Black that maybe he had been too formal, and children don't usually speak that way. But Rebecca seemed very mature, so it was hard to talk like a child. After a while, the protagonist returned to the castle. He soon heard someone calling his name. Looking, he saw Jiho and Lennon in front of him. Jamie asked what they wanted. The boys said that they wanted to apologize. The protagonist asked why the sudden apology, but then answered himself, saying it was the Count who made them apologize. Jiho was embarrassed to hear that. Jamie said he understood but asked what the other guy was doing there. The apprentice mage said that he was his brother. The protagonist asked why they were together. Lennon said he was the one who gave the artifact to his brother. The protagonist was stunned hearing that. Then he said that both brothers had tried to mess with him together and asked the boy's name. Smiling, he said his name was Lennon. Jamie started to sense the mana the boy had and realized that his talent was very good and incomparable to Jiho's, and he also seemed witty. This made the protagonist wonder why, even with a son like this, the Count wasn't satisfied. Lennon said that fortunately, nothing bad happened, and since they had apologized, they could leave now. Jamie started to think that the boy probably thought he was a fool for not showing up at the mess in the hall, so the boy probably thought that everyone except his father was inferior to him. The protagonist deduced that the boy could cause a huge mess if left alone. Jamie told Jiho that he would have trouble fighting for the heir position. Annoyed, the young man asked what he was talking about. The protagonist told Lennon to speak, as it wasn't Jiho's concern. But then he approached the boy and said that he was the one behind the crime, so he deserved the appropriate punishment. Showing his aura, the protagonist asked Lennon if he didn't think so. The boy was confused and started to get scared. Everything started to go dark, and he began wondering where he was, feeling his body get cold, as if he was going to freeze. Lennon was already on his knees, and Jamie, using his magic, told the young man that this was his last chance. But soon the magic began to dissipate. Crying, the boy wondered how he escaped and if it was all just an illusion. Still on his knees, he admitted that he didn't know. Still frightened, he admitted that the only thing he knew was that this was his last chance, and then he looked at Jamie, trembling, and began to apologize. Some families had already started to leave. Seeing that, the protagonist thought that he was finally going home, as he found it very tiring to be out and would rather be showered with kisses by his mother and stay at home. But immediately, he started to wonder why he was thinking that. Simon appeared and told Jamie that he seemed to be in a good mood, and he looked at him as if he wanted to have a conversation. Smiling, the protagonist said no, and that he was just happy to be going home and able to rest. The Count said it was a shame they didn't have a chance to talk. Jamie said he was also a little disappointed, as he had been looking forward to it. The mage said he could stay longer if he wanted. The protagonist said no, as his desire to go home and rest was stronger, since he was completely exhausted, and as for the reason, he was sure Simon was aware. The Count was surprised to hear that, but said it was true and that the magical world had started observing him. The protagonist said he had imagined it would be this way. Simon, smiling, said he knew who he was. Jamie replied that it was clear he knew. While they walked, the protagonist said he had taught Lennon a lesson. The Count said he had imagined, since Jamie seemed out of sorts since the previous day. The protagonist asked the Red Lotus if he wasn't angry for punishing his son. The Count said that Lennon just faced the consequences of his actions, so there was no reason to be angry. Listening to that, Jamie deduced why those boys were such troublemakers. But he said that anyway, Lennon seemed very talented in magic, so it could be good to teach him. Simon said he knew his son's talent better than anyone, and that what he had was nothing. The protagonist said to the Count that it wouldn't hurt to teach him, as he could become better than him with enough training, since he was unable to express his talent because it was suppressed, and that was his father's fault. Simon was stunned to hear that. Jamie said that he was saying those boys were such troublemakers because their own father ignored them, thinking they lacked talent. Jiho was quite average, but Lennon had tremendous hidden talent. Simon asked if he had judged wrongly. He then admitted that he hadn't recognized his son's ability, even as an 8th-class mage, and now it had been confirmed by a child. And looking at the protagonist, he recognized that it seemed like a great mage was standing before him. Jamie told the Count that he could end up breaking the wall while helping his son. This left Simon a little startled. The protagonist's parents called him to leave. So he said goodbye to the Count, telling him to just let what he said go in one ear and out the other since it was spoken by a child, and he started running toward his parents. Simon watched Jamie leave and admitted that, as expected, it was regrettable. After some time, the protagonist had returned home, and at night, he went straight into the forest to meet his servants. Black noticed they were close and warned his master. They were hiding behind some bushes. The protagonist told his servants to hurry up. After they appeared, he asked why they were late. Raiza said they were late because Azard was wandering. The big guy apologized for doing that. Jamie told them to forget about it and tell him what they had discovered. The undead said that the Church of Genis had been doing good deeds in Heis without asking for anything in return, providing food for the hungry and shelter for the homeless. They were naturally improving their reputation and had recently started managing an orphanage. The protagonist asked when they had started moving. Raiza replied that it was right after the collapse of Leval. 2 months ago, Count Welton completely annihilated the Leval crime organization, and the Genis Church officially began missionary work afterward. They visited and ministered to the poor, preaching God's will to them. At first, the citizens paid no attention to them. However, through good deeds and continuous mercy, the people of the territory gradually started relying on the Genis Church, and they soon became devoted members. As a result, the position of the Genis Church in Heis grew to an unimaginable level. Raiza said that currently, the Genis Church was being worshipped as the most benevolent and respected church in Heis. The protagonist was impressed by that and said there was no way they would do something for each other's good. He asked his servants if they believed that war and peace could coexist. The undead looked at each other and said no. However, they believed they were connected. The protagonist said that's exactly what Genis does. A peace built on a pile of blood and bodies. War is when their divinity shines. So what the priests of Genis were doing went against his principles. Jamie said he was sure they were using good deeds as a shield for their work, and the servants needed to find out what it was. The protagonist wanted to discover every little detail of what Genis was planning. The next day, at the church's orphanage, the priest told Ricky that he had done a good job. The boy said to His Holiness that it was nothing, as it was paradise compared to begging and being beaten every day. Ravi had told Ricky that he had been through a lot, but he didn't need to worry anymore. Smiling, the boy responds affirmatively, saying that it had been a month and a half since he entered the orphanage, and that place was wonderful. He admits that if he hadn't entered with his younger sister, they would have died on the streets. After Ricky enters the house, his sister asks how he is. The boy says he's fine and that he's back. Anna was blind and needed to find her brother to talk to him. When their parents found out that the girl was blind, they abandoned them and ran away. To protect his sister, Ricky did all sorts of bad things, but living on the streets was tough, and the adults were cold. It was a desperate life where no one offered help. The Genis were the first to extend a hand to the siblings. For Ricky, it was God's hand, as that day, he and his sister received a new life. He wanted to spread the happiness he received by God's grace and become a priest of God to spread that miracle. While they were walking, a boy runs past the siblings and asks if they heard that Shino, apparently favored by God, was going to become a priest and would go to the main church next week. Rick was impressed to hear that Shino was going to become a priest. That night, the protagonist was flying over the village with Black and tells him that they were close to the location and they could land. The creature tells his master that something felt off. He then looks down and notices someone lying in the street. Jamie, upon approaching, wonders what energy that was, as it seemed like a disgusting sacred energy. He then wonders if he was a priest, as there was a high-ranking cleric who was problematic. The protagonist didn't know why a holy knight was lying on the ground there, and it seemed like a problem. Stepping on his head, he wonders if he should end that man. But suddenly, Arjun grabs the protagonist's leg, startling him. The man could hardly speak, but Jamie was trying to understand what was going on. Arjun keeps trying to speak until, near his limit, says he was hungry. The protagonist was speechless and wonders if he should let that guy starve. So, he leaves him unconscious and leaves with Black. The next day, Jamie was sitting at the table to eat, wondering how that man ended up there. Arjun was sitting with them and tells the protagonist that it was a pleasure to meet him. Jamie started wondering how that man was eating at his own dinner table. The priest tells the Count that if it weren't for his help, he would have died on the streets. Argenos says he didn't do much, and it was all thanks to the troops that brought him to the castle. Arjun says that, since they were the Count's soldiers, it was thanks to him. The Count asks if it was normal for a holy knight to starve to death. The man replies no, but when they reach a high level, they can withstand more hunger. The protagonist, while playing with his sister, found that uncomfortable and didn't know why his parents were treating that man so kindly. Argeno asks Arjun if he belonged to the Pyro Church. The man confirms and says he served the goddess of mercy and punishment, Pyro. The Count says his wife was very surprised when she heard that. Sears says she was indeed surprised. Arjun asks what the reason for the surprise was. Madame Welton asks the man if he knew Bishop Sapphira. The priest asks if she could be from Afton. Sears says she was from the Bell family. Arjun, surprised, stands up, leaving everyone confused, and bows, saying he gives his greetings. The protagonist, stunned, begins to wonder what was going on, because he knew that the Pyro Church was in Afton, where his mother's family was from. But that wasn't the reason he was acting that way. For a holy knight to act like that, the person had to be at least a bishop. So, he starts calling for his father, who asks what the problem was. The protagonist asks why that person was greeting his mother in that way. Jamie didn't like acting like a curious child. The Count says it's a long story and will tell it later. The protagonist is stunned to learn this, as he was curious to know and furious for behaving like a child and not getting any results. His sister tried to get his attention. The protagonist deduces that if the Bell family is close to the Pyro Church, it would be a huge hassle, since his mother would be someone he would eventually have to eliminate. After a while, Arjano was talking with Arjun. He wanted to know how he had ended up there. As far as he knew, the Pyro Church had no business in the eastern region. So he asks if Arjun was there to expand the church's influence. The man, startled, says no, and that he was just chasing someone and somehow ended up there. The Count asks who he was chasing. Arjun says that someone was conducting abominable and indescribable experiments that no human should do, creating a chimera. Arjano is stunned to learn that a chimera creator could be in Heis and is even more curious to know who it is. Arjun begins to tense up and apologizes, as the rest of the information is highly confidential, even among members of the Pyro Church. He can't say more but will share more if they make a deal. The Count asks if he is asking for help. The Holy Knight says yes. Since he is a master of the sword, he is sure he will be of great help. Arjano begins to think about the chimera creator. Externally, chimeras are creatures made from various beings, but chimera creators are treated worse than most criminals, because the core of a chimera is a human. Although there could be chimera creators who don't use humans, there has never been a known chimera creator who did so. The Count says that he cannot promise he will always help, but since he knows his father-in-law's relationship with the Pyro Church, he cannot simply close his eyes to this. Arjun becomes excited. Arjano says he will help him. The soldier starts celebrating and thanking. The Count says no need for many thanks and wants to know why Pyro is after the creator and why they didn't ask the kingdom for help. Arjun says he's sure the kingdom would help if they knew, but the prestige of the Pyro Church would suffer a great blow. The chimera creator the church is after sacrificed more than 10 holy knights. The Count, hearing this, says that this means the creator made chimeras capable of using sacred power. Meanwhile, the protagonist was walking outside and obsessively admits he would never be excited for tea time. His mother, seeing him, asks him to sit while his sister kept jumping for joy. The woman pours a cup of tea for Jamie, who drinks it quickly. She asks the protagonist what was making him so desperately curious. He says it was about the man earlier and why he had kneeled for her. Sears says she knew the question would be about this, since he wanted to know about his family's connection to the Pyro Church. The woman tells Jamie that basically his maternal great-grandfather, who was also his grandfather, was the savior of the Pyro Church. The protagonist is shocked to learn that his mother's grandfather was the savior of the Pyro Church. Sears explains that in the past, when an important item was stolen from the Pyro Church, her grandfather had helped. The incident in the Portsmouth Garden, an incident where the Demon King's followers tried to use the Pyro Church's sacred relic to summon the Demon King but failed. Jamie asks his mother if his family was involved in this incident. The woman says it is said that his grandfather died while trying to stop them from summoning the Demon King. After that, the Pyro Church granted his family the title of Archbishop and swore to treat the Bell family and its future generations as bishops for the next 100 years. The protagonist thinks that it's no wonder his mother seemed a bit sad, then wonders how close she was to her grandfather, being treated as a bishop of the Pyro Church. Jamie thinks it's a ridiculous reward to offer, but he understands why they did it. It was their only sacred relic, and that's a good thing. He admits he will eventually deal with Pyro, but he'll use them as much as he can. His mother calls him while he's still thinking, making him jump. The protagonist asks his mother what she wants. She asks if he wants another cup of tea. Jamie answers yes. That night, at the Janus church, the priest says that the youngest brother, Shino, who had been chosen by god Janus, was leaving that day. Everyone blesses his journey and asks everyone to raise a toast to him on this important day. As they toast, everyone shouts cheers, making the boy happy. Rick, seeing this, thinks that now Shino was finally going to Mount Chongbon. After the ceremony, the boy was in the carriage, saying goodbye to his brothers. He says that his trip had been decided so suddenly and even thought he wouldn't be able to see them again. Rick says he heard from the priest that he would be leaving soon too. Shino says he won't cry for being alone and, since he is going first, he'll wait for his friend. After he says his goodbyes, the carriage leaves, and the brothers stand still watching their friend leave. Rick is determined to become a priest one day. After a while, the carriage has left, and the priest tells Shino that they've already arrived. The boy is surprised at how fast it was. When he got out of the carriage and saw the place, he wondered if this was Mount Chongbon, as he hadn't walked much to get there. He asks the priest, afraid, if this was the main branch of the church. The man tells him to follow him. He begins walking into the place. Shino tells the priest that he thought he was in the wrong place, but the man says it's fine and that he should just follow him. Once inside, the priest opens a book, and a wall starts to move. Then he tells him they need to go downstairs. As they go down, Shino, terrified, says that he doesn't think this is the right place, as it's a scary place. When they enter a room, the boy sees a hand that looks like a monster's. He tells the man that the place is strange and that there is something scary in that room. The priest says to the bishop that the boy is there. Takumi approaches and looks at Shino, who, kneeling, asks the bishop if he is there because God chose him. Takumi says that's what happened. The boy desperately asks why he is in this sinister place instead of Mount Chongbon. The bishop responds that this place is where they achieve utopia, and he is curious about what a pure and innocent child like him would become. He then tells him to enter a room. A monster approaches the boy and says that he is a very decent experimental sample this time, and placing its hand on Shino's head, it says he would make a great chimera. The next day, in the territory of Count Welton on Velbart High Street, Jamie is with Arjun and mentions the name of the street, thinking of it as the biggest street in Heis. The soldier says he remembers that place and had a tough time there when he was hungry in the middle of the night. The protagonist says he understands why he's guiding the night. It's simple. Earlier, at tea time, the Count asks Arjun if he wants to take a stroll around Heis, and in that case, Jamie would be the guide. The man agrees right away. This surprises the protagonist, but that's what happened. While walking with the soldier, the protagonist thinks that he was so unlucky, seriously unlucky. Arjun, on the other hand, thinks he didn't imagine a 9-year-old boy could have all that potential. He then calls out to him and thanks him, saying he had a great time strolling through Heis. Jamie says he also liked it, as it had been a long time since he went out. Arjun says that now that they've finished the walk, they can go back. The protagonist says there's no need for a handshake and asks if he can ask a question. Embarrassed, the man says he can ask anything. Then Jamie asks about the conversation Arjun had with his father. The soldier admits that this was an unexpected question, as he thought Jamie would just ask what a holy night was. So he says they talked about how he was such a beautiful child. The protagonist tells him not to lie. Uncomfortably, Arjun says he wasn't lying, and that they really talked about that. They talked about him the whole time. Jamie gets annoyed, and says that if Arjun didn't want to say, he should just stop talking, because not even a child would believe that. The man apologizes for lying and says that it was an adult conversation. Jamie believes that something is going to happen in Heis, which is why he asked to show him the surroundings of the city. Arjun asks Jamie if he's upset. Jamie thinks for a moment and says that there's still a place they haven't visited. The man asks where that is. The protagonist says it's the highest branch of the Janus Church. The carriage takes them to the church branch. In front of the place, Rick was sweeping. He notices visitors arriving. Happy, Arjun is glad to see that place. Rick, seeing the protagonist, asks if he's the black-haired boy he met on the street. The soldier asks Jamie if the young man is his friend. The protagonist, seeing Rick, remembers him as the boy he bumped into earlier, so he acts as if he doesn't know him. But Rick starts asking why he was acting like he didn't know who he was. Suddenly, the boy starts running, passing by the carriage, and while running, shouts asking why he dyed his hair because he almost didn't recognize him. The wheel of the carriage came loose, and Rick noticed the noise. The guide starts shouting for him to get out of the way. Arjun and the protagonist, seeing the carriage heading towards the boy, are scared. Rick stands still in front of the horses that were close to him. The soldier quickly tries to do something and runs towards the boy, who is paralyzed and crying. The horses are almost upon him. Arjun, even trying, thinks he won't make it in time. Rick starts saying that it's the end for him. The protagonist activates his magic and uses the chains area skill, creating protection around Arjun and the boy. The soldier is impressed, seeing that magic which was able to hold even the carriage. Crying, Rick doesn't believe he's alive and immediately hugs Jamie, squeezing as hard as he can. The protagonist tells him that it's okay and that he can get off him now, as he's ridiculously strong. Arjun admits that the magic Jamie used was much more powerful than anything he had ever seen, and he couldn't believe he was at that level at only 9 years old. Seeing Rick hug him, he thinks that this child is going to be a genius in no time, and that he has a great chance of becoming such a powerful existence that it will be hard to look him in the eye. Jamie asks the soldier why he's confused, as they should be walking already. Arjun asks where they're going. The protagonist says they're going to the genus church. Still surprised, the man says, "That's right." Rick starts following them and says that he was already wanting to go to the church so he would guide them. The boy, smiling, says that this was an orphanage for children like him who had nowhere to go. Suddenly, his sister, Nim, calls Rick and asks where he was and who these people were. The boy says that a carriage almost hit him and that these people saved him. The lady asks if he got hurt or if he was in shock, then thanks Jamie and Arjun, saying that something terrible could have happened to Ricky. The soldier says that it was nothing, as this is something a priest serving pyro should do. Immediately, Nim changes after hearing the word pyro. Arjun says that the protagonist did most of the work. The lady asks who that child is. The soldier says he's the son of the Count of the territory. The protagonist introduces himself and says that he's Jamie Welton. Smiling, Nim says she should have known by his emerald hair, but was still shocked when she heard about the accident. The protagonist notices that there's something off about the woman's expression. If she was born in Heis, she should have recognized him as soon as she saw him, but ignoring the fact that she didn't recognize him, she seemed confused, as if hiding something. Nim asks Arjun if he was there to take Ricky back. The priest says no, he was just there because he heard the church had established itself there that year. The lady says that then it was a visit. She asks the boy to show the young master around while she talks to the soldier. Jamie realizes that the lady wanted to separate him from the priest, and even deduces that she might be thinking of hurting him. So, just in case she intended to do something, he tells Arjun not to forget that they were going to eat with their parents. The soldier is surprised to hear that. He says he'll see him later. Rick, still scared, says that the place was the orphanage where he lived, and further ahead was the restaurant. The protagonist, seeing that, asks him to just keep talking like he was before, as he didn't care for formalities. He should just be himself. The boy begins to smile and asks if he was serious. Jamie says not to say that twice. Rick starts walking and asks them to follow him, as he would show them all the places. The protagonist, seeing that, wonders what the boy's reason for being so excited was. After they walked through all the places, the boy says they saw almost everything, and this was where he and his sister lived. He opens the door and tells Anna that he brought a friend. The protagonist, hearing that, thinks he didn't say he was a friend. The girl gets up and asks if it was true. Jamie freezes when he sees Anna. Rick tells his sister to greet the protagonist, as he was an amazing person. Immediately, the girl does so. But the protagonist is still frozen, and the boy starts asking what happened. Jamie begins to wonder what was with Anna, as she had the demeanor of a saint, especially her 2 eyes were overflowing with holy power, a representative of God from heaven. They are people who serve God, have more authority than anyone else, and are able to use it freely as well. They are born with parts of their body containing a high concentration of holy power. The girl had said her name was Anna, and the protagonist knew she had lost her sight due to the enormous holy power. But when her power as a saint awakens, she will be able to see the entire flow of the world through God's eyes. Jamie thinks that Anna might become a problematic enemy in the future. Then he thinks he could even take her life before that happens, but quickly imagines it's not a good idea. If he could recognize a high-ranking cleric from the church, he should know that too. Rick, seeing how Jamie was, asks if he had fallen in love with his sister. The protagonist asks what kind of nonsense that is. Anna hits her brother on the head and says she had a question, as there was something in that book that confused her, so she wanted to know if he could help her. Rick, sitting, says he'll help. The boy asks which part she was confused about and starts explaining. Meanwhile, the protagonist wonders whose holy power Anna had, but whoever it was, he thinks it's better to keep an eye on both of them. But seeing that now both were interested in the book, he heads towards the door, wondering if he should say goodbye. Rick notices Jamie has left and asks if he was going to the bathroom. The protagonist says no and that he was leaving. The young man says he will accompany him to the entrance and hands the book to his sister, saying he'll be back soon. While they walked, Rick asks if he would visit that place again. The protagonist, seeing that the boy talks too much, asks if he had something he wished to become. Rick says that was a question from a friend, so he liked it. Jamie doesn't really like being called a friend, but holds back to hear the answer. The boy says that at first, he was happy to be with his sister, but now he had different thoughts after being at that place, as now he wished to be chosen by Genis and become a priest. He then says that the day before, one of his friends was chosen and taken to Mount Chongbon. The protagonist is stunned upon hearing that, as thinking about it, he associates the church with human trafficking, the Laval organization, and a chosen person. This could have already happened. Jamie asks the boy where he was before going to that place. Rick replies that he was on the streets. The protagonist asks what he was before that. The young man says he was a messenger boy for Laval. After hearing this, the protagonist is sure he was right about Janice. Meanwhile, Arjun was talking to Sister Nim, saying it had been great talking to him. The lady agrees and asks if he was going somewhere, as she was going to take him back to the Lord. The soldier, while walking, admits that Nim didn't reveal much, but he didn't know why they didn't trust priests from other churches. He then begins to wonder if they might be involved with the Chimera incident. After finding Jamie, the lady asks Rick if he did a good job showing the place to the Lord. The boy responds to his sister that he did. While they talk, the bishop approaches, and Rick immediately pays attention. Takumi says it seemed like an important guest had arrived while he was away. The bishop greets Lord Jamie. The protagonist also greets the man and thinks that the Janus church is targeting children. Takumi asks Arjun who he is. The soldier says he is a servant of Pyro. The bishop apologizes for being away while they were visiting. The priest says there's no need to apologize, as they were well received, but notices a great supernatural energy, and that powerful sacred energy belongs to a holy knight, but is coming from a guard. The protagonist realizes that Arjun's expression is terrible, so he deduces that something is wrong with that holy knight. Jamie starts staring at the bishop, who also seems strange. After some time, they were about to leave. The protagonist says he had heard from Ricky earlier that one of his friends had gone to Mount Chongbon after being chosen by God and was also hoping to become a priest. Arjun is shocked after hearing this, but then changes his expression, saying he was sure Rick would be able to become a priest since he was such a kind child. The protagonist can't believe the soldier still hadn't realized, so he asks what he heard from his father. Arjun asks what he means by that. Jamie says that 2 months ago, his father had subjugated a criminal organization called Laval, and they found out that they were involved in using children for human trafficking. The soldier is in shock. The protagonist continues, saying that, thinking about it, he believes Rick said he was with Level before entering the orphanage. Arjun asks if it's true that the boy was with the organization. Jamie realizes that the soldier has finally understood, so he thinks of giving him another hint and asks if the Janus Church has always been charitable to others. Arjun admits that he had forgotten about this because the Janus Church does no charity at all, and if the reason they built an orphanage was to use children for chimera experiments. That night, back at the castle, the soldier goes directly to speak with the Count and says that Level and the Janus Church were acting together because it seemed that the boy from the orphanage, Rick, had spent some time in Level. Arjano says that the Janus Church was bringing positive influence to the territory, so he had just been observing them. Arjun says that he actually saw a holy knight with the bishop before they left the church, but he couldn't figure it out. The Count asks what he means by that. The soldier says he felt a powerful sacred energy, but he couldn't tell if he was really a holy knight of the Janus Church. So to him, a sacred energy that couldn't be identified due to the chaos was probably a chimera. Arjano says that if this is true, he will not let them go unpunished and will gather his knights immediately. Arjun says they need more proof to do that, then stands up and says he will get more evidence. The Count says that would be dangerous to do alone, but the soldier says he has already made up his mind for this mission. The swordsman asks what the chances of success are. Arjun says he must have an advantage. Arjano says he will send 3 people with him. Then, 3 knights appear behind the soldier, who is startled by not having sensed any presence. The Count explains that these are shadow knights who exist for the purpose of protecting the Welton family. Arjun notices they carry long swords but move like assassins, so he asks if they are really knights. Arjano replies that perhaps in a way. The soldier then thanks them and says he will make sure to discover who they are. Arjano says he will let those knights accompany him to be certain. Meanwhile, in his room, the protagonist wonders how there could be chimeras capable of using sacred energy. Furthermore, the fact that they could use children as ingredients for experiments is repulsive. Even knowing that young children are like unmarked pieces of paper, they are perfect for experiments. Jamie asserts that Janus remains trash for doing this. Lying down, he says that they were still bringing something that wasn't completed, so it seems they were rushing because of something. Therefore, he tells Black to go find Raiza and deliver a message to him. The creature begins to fly, carrying the message to the undead. Meanwhile, the protagonist admits that he should start preparing himself for the battles ahead, as he needs a higher class of magic. Determined, the protagonist says that now Janus could expect that this would hurt them a little. For now, he had a new ability, to memorize a spell that allows you to imprint magic and the use of mana into your mind, so you can use the magic smoothly. In the city, the undead were keeping watch over everything happening, and Azard asks his partner how long they needed to keep doing this. Raiza says it's until they see any suspicious movement. The big guy retorts that so far, they haven't seen even a rat, let alone any suspicious knights. The long-haired one replies that they just need to do what their master told them. Azard says he's really bored, and this is annoying. But suddenly, someone enters the place where they were. Raiza hears the noise. The Genis Knight was there, saying that he would defeat them all. Azard realizes and immediately dodges the attack, which passes very close to his body. They begin to feel that holy energy and find it horrible. The knight continues shouting that he will defeat them, ready for battle, and keeps attacking frantically. Raiza tells his partner to be quick and inform the master. Azard starts running and tells Raiza to hold on for a bit, but the knight notices and begins chasing him, saying he will take his life. The big guy notices, but it's too late. Raiza tells him to dodge and pushes him to try to save him. Azard is thrown away, buying time to escape from the invader, but the white-haired one takes the hit. Unexpectedly, the protagonist arrives and uses the dark dimension in the house they were in. He enters through the window and asks who called him. Now face to face with the knight, Jamie tells his servants that no one would be able to figure out what was about to happen because this was a very powerful spell. But he admits that he could only memorize it with Black's help, as 6th class magic was still really difficult. The knight, who was only there for one thing, attacks, saying he would also defeat him. The protagonist uses gravity, a 5th class spell that intensifies gravity in the area, suppressing the target so they can't move. The knight begins to stand still until he can no longer walk. Jamie uses the dead grip, a spell that summons the dead to restrain the target. Even so, the invader continues saying that he would take everyone's life. The protagonist doesn't waste time and now uses sacrifice, a spell that sacrifices souls and summoned creatures to create a massive explosion. The magic begins to envelop the knight's body, causing a huge explosion. After it's over, the protagonist watches to see what happened. The knight, still on his knees and wounded, continues speaking. Jamie realizes that this one was at an expert level. The invader draws his sword and attacks again. The protagonist comments that he had grit for not giving up yet, but unfortunately he had found the wrong opponent. He then uses Puppet, a magic that attaches ropes to someone's soul and controls them. The invader falls back to his knees. The protagonist now knows that he is incapable of breaking free from the restrictions and unable to assess the danger. Jamie approaches and tells the knight that it seemed like he was curious about the current situation. He then says that fragments of the dead had entered his body with the explosion that just happened, and now what happened belonged to him, and there was nothing more he could do. The protagonist thinks that now, with the loss of control over his body and unable to use dark magic, there was no point in the knight continuing to fight. The best move against an enemy that cannot be defeated is to flee, but that invader begins to cast something different. The protagonist is impressed and deduces that it was self-destruction. He then runs toward him, saying that this wouldn't happen, and uses his black hand, hitting the spot where the magic was happening. But even with his hand on the knight's chest, Jamie doesn't understand why he can't stop it. An intense glow began to fill the place, and the protagonist admits that he wouldn't be able to dodge it. But Black starts pulling his master, making him detach from the knight just in time before the self-destruction happens. A massive explosion occurred inside the house, and after going through that, the protagonist admits that if it hadn't been for Black, he would have had problems, and to think it would have been possible to break the dark dimension, fully unleashing his sacred energy. But escaping with just that wasn't enough. Jamie tells Black to absorb the light. He then sees that the knight was fleeing. Using another spell, the protagonist tells him not to go so fast and manages to land an attack on his back. A monster's mouth was revealed on the invader's back. Jamie deduces that this was the appearance of a chimera. He then uses the chained area and manages to trap that monster. The protagonist tells Black to go ahead and, with another attack, is able to pierce the invader. He now uses the death explosion, a darkness explosion that destroys even the toughest armor. Jamie deduces that now the physical body had reached its damage limit and was unable to move. It was time to execute the final process. But the monster began to emerge, and the protagonist was impressed by the form the knight was taking. After the transformation, the knight quickly escapes through the window. Jamie, looking on, realizes he had lost the monster. Raiza starts calling for his master and says it was a good job, but the protagonist says he lost the target. The undead asks if they need to track it. The protagonist says that even though it's unlucky they lost it, it didn't matter. Raiza starts to wonder how losing the enemy could be fine, as he thought they were supposed to capture it. He then apologizes to his master and says he couldn't understand his intentions, as he wanted to know why it was okay. Jamie says there isn't much to say, as it's not easy to erase traces of dark magic. And the moment the black hand pierced the knight's lungs, his entire body was filled with dark magic, which means he could find him whenever he wanted. After some time, still that night, the bishop was making some notes when there was a noise at the window. When he opened it, he saw the creature entering, and when he grabbed it in his hand, he was enraged, thinking it was impossible for the knight to have been defeated, as this was the essence of their research. He didn't think a sacred chimera knight with sacred energy could be destroyed. Still in the house, Raiza asks his master if, in this case, the enemy wouldn't know that dark magic was used. The protagonist says that he knew what Raiza was thinking, but they wouldn't be able to find out. The undead asks why. Jamie says it's because his current powers were completely different from dark magic, although he still didn't understand why the current dark magic was so weak against sacred energy. He then explains that from the beginning, his power was invented to be a god killer. A god killer, a type of darkness made to kill sacred beings and completely obliterate existence without leaving traces. And that was the type of dark magic he was using. That's why it didn't matter what those idiots used with sacred energy. They would never be able to discover details about him. The bishop was shocked that there was someone on Earth capable of doing that. The protagonist explains that from the beginning, his power was invented to be a god killer, and that's why his servants didn't need to worry. After explaining, he asks where Azard was. Raiza, before starting to explain, hears the door open and the big guy appearing, asking if everything was okay. But seeing his master, he changes his mood and says he's relieved, as he thought Raiza had been mercilessly beaten by the knight, but he was happy the master had taken care of it. But Jamie asks where he was during this time. Azard says he fainted because he fell from the window, but came running back as soon as he woke up. The protagonist didn't know that zombies could faint. Thinking that his servant wasn't telling the truth, he orders him to kneel. He sits on his back and tells him to withdraw his orders to monitor, as the enemies were clever, so they should observe from a distance. Raiza says that now he understands. The protagonist then uses his magic to heal his servant's wounds. The undead is startled, but Jamie says that he put some measures in place, so he won't feel the same as before for now. He warns Azard to stay with his partner and protect him. Still kneeling, the servant says he understands. The protagonist walks to the window and says that he was leaving now, and they should be careful. Along with Black, Jamie leaves. Meanwhile, in the Genis church, the bishop thought it was impossible for this to have happened, as he never imagined that someone on Earth could defeat a chimera of a sacred knight, rank expert, made by the combination of 4 living organisms. Takumi starts thinking it might have been the Welton family who did this, but he's not convinced it could be them, as he reflects more and admits that if it were the Count, the main body wouldn't have been able to return alive. Besides the connection he had with the sacred knight, it would be cut in an instant. A magical barrier could have been created, but the bishop thought this was impossible unless it was a final stage magic. But for this to happen, there would need to be a very powerful mage in that territory. Then he starts thinking it could be the young lord, but quickly dismisses this thought, saying it couldn't be possible, because even though he was a genius, he was only a 4th-class mage and would need to be at least 5th class to face the chimera. As he thought about who could have caused all the damage, he admits that he would have to speed up the experiments before it's too late. But a dark knight appears and places a dagger on his neck, asking if the second plan also failed, as he thought there was no need to hear the answer. Takumi, frightened, says that it didn't fail. The assassin then asks what this was. The bishop says that this was still an incomplete product. Vikram says that, apparently, everything was fine for being an incomplete product, and makes a small cut on his neck. Takumi, desperate, says that's not what he meant, and that this happened because something problematic interfered. With 1 or 2 more experiments, they would be able to get the result. Vikram says that for someone who doesn't even know what this problematic thing is, he was talking too much. He then asks the bishop if he wanted to become a guinea pig, but before getting an answer, he disappears and says they were watching him, and the moment the Count gets involved, everything will be over. Takumi takes a deep breath and can't believe that the 7 knights were monitoring him. Vikram is part of the 7 swords of the Genis church. The 7 knights protect the archbishop of the Genis church on Mount Chongbon. They are powerful knights, almost at the level of a master. Takumi was bothered that they were treating him this way. He was starting to think that the archbishop was an irritating old man, and once the experiment was complete, he would take his place. That night, in the Welton castle, the protagonist was in his room with the knight's body on the floor. He wonders if he overdid it, but admits that they made interesting sacred chimeras. He then begins to examine the body to see what they had placed there. After opening the body, he recognizes that they had joined the parts very well. Insect legs, organs resistant to flames, compound insect eyes, and finally, the base, which was a human body. Jamie says that the escape was possible due to the combined abilities of 4 living organisms to avoid magic and their incredible speed capabilities. The crucial point would be the core filled with sacred power. They transformed that sacred knight into a chimera with the core, but the question was, why they did that? The protagonist even thinks that Genis intends to start a war, but whatever the objective was, it was quite relevant, and Genis hadn't changed at all, as they still saw humans as insects and tools. Now, enraged, the protagonist mutters to himself, Diablo live, and that Lord Volfir would avenge them. Now, everyone was waiting for Diablo Volfir in hell, and humanity had lost everything because of the atrocities committed by Genis. The protagonist knew he descended to this place after tens of thousands of years to prevent them from doing this, so he was determined not to let the 12 gods do what they had done in the past. Still in the church, Liang, conversing through a crystal ball, was bothered by how this had happened in just one day. The bishop says that this was beyond their expectations, but since the main body had returned, the creator responds by questioning how he dared to offer excuses when their products were failing. Takumi apologizes, saying there was nothing he could do, and that this happened due to the unexpected involvement of a third party. Liang, enraged, asks what they should do now. The bishop says he was thinking of selecting another person soon. The creator suggests it could be the girl who possesses the gift of a saint, as if he had someone like her, he would be happy to make the chimera. Takumi slams his hand on the table and says that they shouldn't even dream about that, as they couldn't waste someone with a holy gift on something like a chimera. But in any case, the next guinea pig had already been chosen. Burning his records, he says that he was a loyal servant of Genis, and the only blood relative of the saint, a boy named Ricky.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and like the video. Thank you.